We have special presentations, of which we have none tonight. Next, we have 161 Main Street and 161 Nelson, variance requests for relief from rear setback. Madison or Scott?
I'm going to start this one out. So before I dive into the variance application itself, we would like to briefly go over a couple of the statements in the memo that was in front of y'all tonight concerning public notice and its requirements. So I'm going to go through the sequence of events, and Scott's going to elucidate what his discussion with Mike Sawyer, our town attorney, is. So just so that everybody's aware, the public notice section has a posting requirement on the physical property, notices sent out to adjacent properties, and a newspaper posting requirement. And that was due for the Planning Commission hearing on the 19th, which was last Monday. Signs were posted. They weren't the correct signs. They were signs with the wrong dates on them. This was brought to the town's attention on Thursday, the 22nd, so 3 days later. Staff immediately contacted the applicant saying, hey, the signs that have been posted have the wrong dates on them. Please reprint the signs and put up the correct signs. And that happened on the 22nd. So they were technically 3 days into that required 10-day posting period. That was only for Planning Commission. While both signs went up at the same time, the notice deadline for the council, the presumed council date was the 26th, I believe, this past Sunday.
So two different signs, one for Planning Commission, one for council.
Yes.
One sign was correct, one sign was not.
All adjacent property owner letters were sent by the deadline. The newspaper posting was sent by the deadline. However, it was just the one singular sign that would not have been posted by the deadline. So that is the sequence of events. And now Scott's going to talk about his conversation with the town attorney.
Okay. Are there any questions about that? You were shaking your head.
Well, I understand now when Madison finished, but the proper date for council is September 3rd, is it not? Okay, just so people know that.
Yeah, just so for clarity, there's 3 forms of notification. The primary form of notification for the town in most jurisdictions is notice within a newspaper of general circulation. Right? That's standard. That's the kind of the lowest bar of public notification. The town code does also require mailed notice for these types of application and posting of signs on properties 10 days before the hearing date. In the past, we've had conversations with our legal team about, is one more important than the other? Is one absolutely required and the other 2 are courtesy or nice to have? I don't want to have that conversation tonight. I don't think that's what we're asking you to consider. When I did speak with Mike Sawyer yesterday about a number of things that Mr. Boyd had brought up in his letter or his email, we talked about public notice and the fact that while we could interpret the code that way, that mailed note or notice in the paper is the primary form, the other 2 are also nice to have, but as long as we have at least 2 forms of notification that we're correct, we're good from a legal standpoint. He advised and he said, quote, you're not going to like this and Lynn's not going to like this, but it's really something for the Planning Commission to determine. If based on the evidence provided, based on what we can prove that 2 forms of notice were provided correctly and we missed notice by 3 days for the sign posting, is that adequate notice? One tip or piece of advice he gave, and this is not a standard, was, if there are people in the audience, if you've received public comment, people know about the hearing, that's one indication that public notice was successful. I'll leave it at that.
So I don't make the decision. The word was there, it was Planning Commission.
Right.
So can I just have a hand, those who feel that we can go ahead with tonight's meeting, a hand raise? Or those who want to? Okay, so we're going ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any questions about Mr. Boyd's comments, Commissioner Boyd, I should say? And we can maybe talk about that when we get to Planning Commission discussion, deliberation.
I think
or
that,
public
and
comment.
what about the other letters that came in?
Yeah,
Those will be included as part of the record. They will not be read into the record because there's 6 of them.
Because what?
There's 6 of them.
you can read fast if you
Yeah.
want.
And if we have questions on
I was gonna say, I only have
Boyd's comments,
I
do we
might
ask that
have
now or do we ask that
There were 3 in the
post?
packet.
My advice is to open the hearing and
Oh, yes, you're right, okay. What?
Amanda asked a question if we should discuss or ask questions about Commissioner Boyd's email and the staff responses to those now, or if we should wait. My advice is to start the hearing, let staff and the applicant present. You can ask questions, and once you get into either public, I wouldn't do it under public comment, I would do it under planning commissioner
Comments,
deliberation or comments.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. But I would like us to read the 6. They're very small. Do you agree?
Yes.
Do you
Okay.
agree?
Do
Anybody
you
else?
just wanna do that
They're
when we
very
open it
small.
for public
When
comment?
we open it to public comment, yes. Okay. We do need to find the other 3. Okay, who's presenting?
I am presenting. The applicants, Spence and Stephanie Neubauer, request review of request for relief from the 30-foot rear setback at 161 Main Street and 161 Nelson Avenue in the Old Town 100 Block A zone district. The 100 block design guidelines within Appendix B of Chapter 16 were adopted in 2023. At that time, the purpose and intent of requiring the rear setbacks along Eagle and William Streets was to ensure the provision of parking for residential uses in mixed-use buildings, and in the case of William Street, to create the physical conditions necessary to promote a Woolnerv concept which allows for vehicular and pedestrian use within the same travel corridor. Since adoption, the guidelines, specifically the rear yard setback requirement, have not been implemented as there have been no new building or major redevelopment proposals. Additionally, staff suggests that upon adoption, the rear yard setback requirement did not contemplate 1, the proposed use is 100% commercial. A note on that, parking requirements for commercial uses were eliminated at the time the guidelines were adopted to incentivize commercial sales tax generating uses. 2, there may be a valid need for an expanded first floor area due to federal regulations. And 3, an inability to utilize the full capacity for building height and massing due to those federal regulations. In an effort to work within the spirit and intent of the guidelines and to otherwise reduce the amount of relief from the rear setback requested to achieve the project design goals, the applicant is proposing to reduce the rear setback from 30 feet to 10 feet for the first floor of the building and from 30 feet to 20 feet for the second floor of the building, thus creating a stepping effect. The first floor on the rear would be capped at a 14-foot eave height and the second floor would be capped at a 20-foot eave height. According to section 1621-690 subsection D, findings required, the Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals shall make the following findings before granting a variance. Number 1, there are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applicable to the site of the variance that do not apply generally to other properties in the same zone. Number 2, the exceptional or extraordinary circumstances of the site create a situation in which the strict literal interpretation and enforcement of the specified regulation would result in practical difficulty or unnecessary physical hardship inconsistent with the objectives of this chapter. Number 3, that the granting of the variance will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, or materially injurious to properties or improvements in the vicinity and will not result in substantial impairment to the purposes of this chapter. And number 4, there is no substantial impairment to the public that would result from the granting of this variance. The applicant has reduced the total amount of relief requested as evidenced by the building design, which steps up in mass and form from first floor to second floor, remaining cognizant of the impacts on the pedestrian experience and in keeping with the overall intent of the design guidelines. Staff does not believe that this will have a negative impact on light or air, and in fact is respectful of the shading effects on walkways around the building based on the massing presented. The proposed design does not contemplate perpendicular parking along William Street except for a loading dock area, and so there should be minimal conflict with the parking across the street at the Molly G building. Staff suggests that the intention of the 30-foot rear setback is to ensure enough area within a lot to provide adequate parking for any second story and above residential uses. As stated within the applicant's letter of intent, since federal rules do not allow residential use above a distillery, we cannot utilize the code allowed height for other uses. With no residential uses allowed within the proposed building per federal regulations, the prioritization of economic viability and welfare within the downtown corridor by the Minturn Municipal Code Old Town Character Area Purpose and Intent, the 2023 Imagine Minturn Community Plan, and the Town of Minturn Town Council 2023 to 2025 Strategic Plan, and the proposed design of the building which otherwise complies with the design guidelines and goals for activation on William Street, there may be a case for physical hardship and/or practical difficulty to allow for the requested relief from the rear setback. Staff recommends that the applicant's request for a variance for relief from the strict application of the town's rear setback limits at 161 Main Street and 161 Nelson Avenue may be granted as the request generally meets all variance required criteria, particularly for practical difficulty.
Scott, do you have anything?
I do not have anything to add to that. So applicant, I guess.
Robert, are you presenting?
Yes.
Please.
Hello, my name is Robert Creasy. I live at 453 Pine Street, and my office is at 105 William Street here in town. I'm the architect for Spence and Steph Neubauer, and let's see. So thank you for considering our application. We're hoping that we're going to provide an iconic building that's strong with historical references, provides character, and a more friendly pedestrian experience than what could be built on that lot. Our intention is in asking for this variance, we're trying to reinforce the Woodruff character of William Street with better view access and better access to sunlight than if you were to build what could be built on that lot. The max floor area needed for this business to be viable is what we're requesting. It being a distillery, they need room for heavy equipment and barrels and that kind of thing, which can't really effectively be on a second floor. In addition, because of federal regulations that Madison referred to, we're not allowed to have residential occupancies. So the use of second and third floor uses are effectively not possible for this this business. There are only 3 lots in town that have a 30-foot rear setback. There are larger setbacks for river separation, but for rear yard setbacks, there are only 3 that have this requirement. The codes do not require parking for commercial use, and our understanding is that this rear setback was for residential parking in the event that there was a residential use in that building. We are, however, recognizing a need for that right-of-way, which is only 15 feet deep, to be 23 feet deep, so that the perpendicular parking for the Molly G building is effective, and the two-way travel to the basement of the Molly G buildings is possible. Also, I'd like to point out the current code does allow for balconies on the second floor and above to be encroaching into that setback by 10 feet. So where we're asking for the 20-foot setback at the second floor, that's effectively what the code already allows with the balcony encroachments. And in addition, the code allows for a terrace 4 feet high, say in the event that someone were to develop with a restaurant. They could have an outdoor dining terrace 4 feet high that goes all the way to within 5 feet of the property line. So that would not allow for that enlarged right-of-way. So just potentially, if someone else were to develop it, they could further pinch that right-of-way on William Street. In addition, as you'll see in some, actually, can you pull up page 32? If you were to build this to the maximum that the code allows, you could have a roof height up to 40 feet high in a pitched roof or 30 feet high with a flat roof. Our mid-height elevation is only 23 feet. So that's what you could be looking at on William Street. So this is sort of representing the terrace that could be coming out. And these are the upper floor second and third floor porches, balconies could, that are open could come out as far as this, and then pitched roofs could be that high. If you can see, our building is really only encroaching in this small chunk at the rear. So by stepping the height of our setback, if you could pull up page 26. Stand out a little bit. There you go. So the current setback is here. The 10-foot setback for the first story would be to this point, the second story to here, and then the roof is tapering back so that we're allowing a lot of light and air access to Williams Street. If it were developed to the full extent of the lot, you could have a building coming in this kind of a profile, even higher and closer to the street than what we were showing. So by stepping the height, we're bringing the building down to a more human scale and increasing access to light and air. Additionally, by reducing the paved area of the parking along Williams Street. So currently, see, actually, if you could bring up page 23. Currently on Williams, so this is the Williams Street right-of-way is 15 feet, and we're proposing to, provide what the town is requesting, a 23-foot right-of-way. In the event that you had a 30-foot setback, you'd have a parking lot of pavement. It'd be all asphalt for a 70-foot span instead of, with the parking of Molly G, it's less than 50 feet. And so our feeling about that is that this is more successfully creating that Wohnriff feeling of a pedestrian-friendly street where there are cars and people are sharing the street. And it more closely approximates the town's design framework principles and vision for Williams, where the streets are shared with people in an animated streetscape. We hope you can see we're trying to create a building that's more to scale to the site and adjacent buildings. If you pull up page 28, we've ghosted in the mattress building that's adjacent to this lot. And which more closely aligns with the town's design intention for pedestrian-friendly environment that could be built on the site compared to if another developer were to maximize the building's floor area. And then as with the Williams Street, if you can bring up page 31 maybe?
41?
31. You can see that, so this left side is Nelson Street. That by keeping the height down along that street frontage as well, we're providing view access from Main Street toward the water tank. And that is also allowing for more light and air and sunlight really is what matters in winter to help prevent those streets from icing up by having only a one-story building instead of what could be, let's go to 32, I think is where we were before. You can see if there were a tall wall on Nelson Street there, how much more shaded Nelson Street would be at that point. In that, we feel our proposal for a variance from this onerous rear setback, which only very selectively applied to just 3 lots in town, will provide a much safer, more enjoyable relationship of the building to pedestrians than the current code actually provides. We hope you recognize it's actually a more successful example of the design intent of Minturn for these pedestrian-friendly streets. And then I'd like to address, I know you're going to read them out, but I just want to say that we're thankful for the multiple letters of support for this project that came into the town. And then I also appreciate the concerns of the 2 other letters. The first expressed concern about the type of business. And that's not an issue tonight. This is a rear setback variance, so it's something which will be addressed. The second letter also talked about this. There will need to be a conditional use permit for this building type and the use type that will be there. And that will come before planning, I'm sure it's at some later date, assuming we go forward with this. The second Letter also expressed concern about compliance with the town's community plan, which we actually feel is better addressed by our proposal than a strict adherence to the code with a massive build out, as exemplified by that image. We're also, our project explicitly addresses environmental sustainability, and it has a full solar array, water conservation systems, adaptive reuse of materials. And in fact, Walking Mountains has provided Spence and Stephanie's business with a globally recognized actively green certification. So their intention is to make this a very, essentially to be a role model project of what a small distillery can do to be a net zero business that has no net carbon impacts. And I'm sure they'd both be happy to talk about this further if you have more questions about the specifics in regards to that. And finally, the building should pose no greater fire risk as it will be, as per fire code, fully sprinklered. And that should address any fire concerns. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has some for me.
We're gonna go to the public first.
Okay.
Is there anybody in the audience who will open to public comment? So please, state your name and address.
Krista Driscoll, 115 Nelson Avenue. As was pointed out, there is no ability to have residential above this commercial space, so there would be less need for parking. The way I understand it, you're still providing 2 spots in the 161 Nelson.
3 spots.
Yes.
Alongside the building.
Parallel, yeah.
Yeah. So they're actually providing more than what's required, since there's 0 required for commercial space. The front setback of the Molly G building provides a sun corridor for that area. So it isn't the dark, cavernous river walk thing that everyone was very concerned about when we were doing all the meetings about the 100 block guidelines. The roof line of the proposed building maintains view corridors of the water tower, as well as our views across the valley, since we're a little uphill of them, which we appreciate. It could definitely be way more massive in scope, as indicated in the renderings that were shown this evening. The depth of the lots on Main Street make it very difficult to build with a 30-foot setback for a business like this that is federally mandated to retain most of their production on the ground floor due to flammability and things like that. The intent of the 100 block guidelines was to encourage thoughtful growth and architectural character, and to attract sales tax generating businesses to town, and I believe this distillery and this layout achieves that. And more personally, we've gotten to know Spence and Steph a little better over the last few months since they constructed their weed ram, and they've been very respectful neighbors. They've been very receptive of our questions and very open about their plans for this space. We spoke with them many times about what they were planning, and they even advised us that we would be getting our certified letter in the mail before we got it. So we appreciate your communication.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Ken? Oh, there's 2 Kens, sorry. I forgot. Ken Mintz, please.
10 Mintz, 167 Williams Street. Before I start, I'll just note that I have not received my letter in the mail with notice. Okay. I'm very supportive of having something built in that empty lot that we've all looked at for a number of years. And I do like the drawings that have been submitted and the lighter or less bulky building that's proposed. But I do have a lot of questions, comments. So I was reading the Minturn code of permitted uses in this district, and a distillery is not a permitted use. So if we then say, well, it's really a bar and a restaurant, I would not agree with that. The state of Colorado, for a distillery pub, only requires 15% of the revenue to come from the retail component. So 85% of it is a distillery. With that being said, the project doesn't really reach the threshold of Mintern's definition of a retail business. It also, one of those points of emphasis is that retail occupies the entire ground floor. Obviously, that would not be the case with a distillery occupying, I'm going to say, the bulk of the ground floor space. So in essence, we're not building a retail business, we're building a factory. Now, permitted uses in the area do include light industrial. I would venture to say that with a license that allows them to distill over 400,000 liters of spirits, that we're not dealing with light industrial. We're talking about some major manufacturing here. And obviously, as just previously mentioned, a conditional use would be required if it was deemed to be a permitted use as light industrial. So I think we all need to get beyond the trendy ambiance of distillery and the cachet of a distillery and look at it for what it is. It's a factory on the 100 block of Minturn. Okay, let's talk about licensing just for a bit. Does the applicant currently have a license for a distillery pub
Chair,
in this location?
You can direct your
Ken,
questions to
direct
the,
it to me, and we'll get back to you at the
Okay.
end of the public comment. Thank you.
Okay. Does the applicant already have in hand an approved state license for a distillery pub in this location? I don't know the answer to that. But if the applicant does not, do we make a habit of issuing variances when we don't even know that they will ever get approval to run this business? It seems like it's, what's the expression, the cart before the horse. So I think it's out of sync to be considering until we have some more answers. My understanding is variances are forever. They go with the property. So, playing devil's advocate, what if a variance is granted and the applicant decides not to build a distillery? Well, they now have the option to do another permitted use, putting all that bulk in and making it even 20 feet bigger because of getting that variance. The same thing would hold true, and they'd also have no space for parking if they went for a different route besides the distillery. And then obviously, in the future, if the business closed, there was another owner, that person would have that extra 20 feet to do something beyond what was ever intended there. So I think we need to consider the future beyond what the current applicant is asking for.
Yep. Is that it, Ken?
Now, one of the requirements to get a license, a distillery pub license by the state is that it meets reasonable requirements and the, quote, desires of the adult inhabitants of the neighborhood. So has the applicant or planning or PNZ or the town surveyed the inhabitants of the area to find out if they want it? It's a requirement for them to get a license. I doubt that has been done, and I certainly haven't been contacted as to my support or lack of support. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some zoning issues.
Can
Yeah.
we, at the moment, we are doing, tonight, I think what you've covered is great. But going into zoning is a whole nother subject, and we're at 5 minutes, so if you don't mind.
Well, I'm talking about what Madison was reading.
I would just encourage everyone to speak to the variance criteria and the findings.
That's what I'm gonna
Great.
talk about.
Okay.
Okay, so the applicant put forth several reasons as to why they wanted the variance. They suggested that since they are not using some of the vertical bulk, well, give us that bulk back in the rear of the building. That's not a legal argument to get a variance. They also said that the current setback only exists for 3 lots. True. And as we know, Minturn streets and buildings are very quirky, and that's probably the only reason why it applies in that area. And finally, and most importantly, the applicants have said that the project is not financially viable without a variance. That is also not a valid reason, legal reason to issue a variance. So in essence, it's no different than any, I'll say, developer who we've all had to deal with in the past, who wants to jam in as many condos or units into a piece of real estate. It's the same situation. Now, as far as the planning department criteria, I want to introduce a couple of
Can we,
plan-
unless it's something different than what's in here, we probably will be going through that further into the meeting, correct? I'm sure somebody will tell us what we need to follow, but
talking about all of the issues that were
the
being raised.
variance,
I wanted to introduce, which planning will certainly be aware of, the concept of reasonable use of the property. Well, there are dozens of permitted uses in the code that would not require a variance to be built. It's the choice of the applicant to build what they want to build that is requiring a variance. Courts all over the country, including Colorado, have ruled that the highest and best use of a property is not a reason to grant a variance. That just means they want to do more and are using that as a reason to get a variance. And that has been upheld in every state, including Colorado. You can't just say, I want to use more, put in more, when it's not part of what's allowed, and suggest that's a hardship. So talking about hardship, the applicants are experienced in distillery as operators, but they purchased the property with a reliance on securing variance relief. They were aware they would need a variance. Okay? In legal terms, there's this self-created hardship. So there is no hardship in their presentation, financial or other. They created it by choosing to do what they would like to do. And again, the courts have ruled over and over that self-created hardship is not sufficient for variance relief. Okay, some of the staff responses on page 6 of the packet this week. They mentioned street level dedicated to retail uses. Well, we've got a street level that's going to be used predominantly for manufacturing. On page 7, they respond, variance should not result in any detrimental effect on the welfare of the town. So under that, there are several points. Relationship to other existing uses. Well, it puts the Minturn market at risk by bumping out an extra 20 feet. If you recall, a few years back, there was a automotive crash on Main Street and lanes were closed in both directions. The emergency detour around it went up Nelson and then against the one-way on William Street. Granting a 20-foot variance will only make that virtually impossible.
Just a moment, Ken. Is everybody in the commission okay with the extended time he's taking?
I'm okay.
I'm okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Again, existing uses, the town and MR Minturn use a lot of that space for snow storage. And I know in previous cases, council had ruled that uses of private property for snow storage was to the benefit of the town. I think that was down at the end of Boulder Street a number of years back. And the space is also currently being used for that 20-foot request for variances, also being currently used for parking for all of our other commercial businesses. So that would hinder our existing businesses that provide a lot of our sales tax dollars. In terms of compatibility with existing structures, well, none of the mattress shop or the two gift shops go back as far as their requested variance. Okay, and then next major point on approval criteria. Create a physical condition necessary to promote a, how do you pronounce it? WUNRF concept, allowing for vehicular and pedestrian use within the same corridor and providing adequate maneuverability along these corridors. So, since I live right at the intersection of Williams and Nelson, I'm probably best suited to talk about what goes on there. I can tell you that the semis that deliver to Magusto's and the Country Club cannot currently exit onto Nelson without great problems. I watched one take 20 minutes the other day to try to get out of there, partially because there was a car parked within the proposed 20-foot setback. So we're inhibiting maneuverability, which is specifically what's part of the plan. So I would also ask whether the applicant or planning did any vehicular studies on all this maneuverability. What's the turning radius of a semi? Or are we gonna just tell Magustos and the country club that they can't get deliveries anymore? Okay, another concern that fits into that general compatibility of vehicular and pedestrian is the number of vehicles that come off of Main Street onto Nelson. I'd say 50% of them turn around and go back out Nelson, either because they can't enter Williams, it's a one-way against them. So that's a very high percentage of the cars going in there, and these vehicles have trailers, they're pulling campers, they can't maneuver and will only be able to maneuver less or not at all. So we're gonna have just a major stoppage of vehicles that will not be able to turn around. It is also causing more people to enter William Street illegally because they can't turn around and go back out Nelson. This was all documented in a town parking and maneuverability study pre-COVID. Michelle should have the results, but they could not find solutions to the problem, and we look to be potentially making it worse.
Can you wrap it up soon? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, the staffing response. So granting a variance should not result in any detrimental effects on the welfare of the town. In an article in the National Library of Medicine, which is part of the National Institute of Health, the abstract starts out by saying, distilleries are among the most polluting industries because of ethanol fermentation resulting in discharge of large quantities of high-strength liquid effluents with high concentrations of organic matter, nitrogen compounds, low pH, high temperatures, dark brown color, and high salinity. So I'm not aware of what procedures the applicants may have, but I don't know if Eagle River Water and Sanitation District has been consulted. This is the exact type of stuff where they just spent $30 million to upgrade their facility to get this stuff so it doesn't go into the river. Okay, let's talk about odor. It's a well-known fact that all food and beverage manufacturing disperses odors into the outside. There are ways to control it, but I'm not aware of what the applicant plans to do. I don't think any of us want the smell of rotten eggs all over the 100 block for all of our tourists to have to deal with, as well as residents.
Madam Chair, can I just ask you to remind the public that we're talking about a variance and not a use right now?
Yeah.
We don't, we're not discussing potential use.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, then I will not talk anymore about the odors or the dangerous vapors that are a result of ethanol leaking from barrels, also a known fact in the distillery industry. And you should all be aware of whiskey fungus, which is,
That is not a variance.
okay.
We know
So
that.
I will summarize then.
Please.
The applicant has not provided any sufficient legal justifications for granting of the variance. All they talk about is economic viability. There are many other reasonable uses of the property that don't require a variance. Any hardship claimed is self-created and therefore not justification for a variance. And I believe the planning department failed to consider the requirements of our own comprehensive plans, alternate uses of the property that are reasonable, lack of a true and self-created hardship. And obviously I've talked about the detrimental effects on the welfare of the town of Minturn, particularly in the 100 block. Sorry to take so long, but I hope some of it was illuminating.
Thank you very much, Ken. Ken Halliday, did you want to come up?
Sure, yeah, thank you. That's a tough act to follow. I don't have all that
He did his homework.
detail. Yeah, no, there was a lot of good points, particularly the trucks. You guys are going to have to look at all that. I don't know Steph and Spence that well, but what I do know of them, I'm really, really impressed. And I just wanted to come at this from some personal experience developing. We actually developed an old brewery. And by the way, there's a hotel that's connected to the brewery. We've got residences all around there. It is a huge magnet for the project. I come at this from a standpoint of the development of Minturn. I care deeply about Minturn. I care about the human scale, the character, the historic nature of it. I think this building and this use fitted exactly, and I'm really excited about it. I don't normally come to a PNC, but I felt like I wanted to come and say that I think this is the type of business we ought to have in Minturn. It's unique. It's going to bring people that want to come in and they're going to buy a bottle of whiskey that says Minturn, and they're going to take it with them and they're going to talk about it. And the fact that the square footage between retail and manufacturing, that happens with restaurants, it happens with a lot of different businesses, and we had many like that. And I would just say that as you guys consider this, think about that this is the right kind of business. They need the space to operate. I think it's a compelling business for, there'll be a story about it by its locals in Minturn doing something. They're graduating from one location, now they're going to be front and center, which I think is terrific. And I think we ought to try to be flexible to keep them here, so they don't go elsewhere, frankly. And since they don't have residential, they cannot have residential. I think granting, I would worry about the precedent effect, right, of granting variances, if I was y'all, and granting a variance in this unique circumstance where they can't have residential. I think if they could, they would, and those spaces would be taken up by parking. But since they can't, they won't. And so it seems to me that we'll actually be giving them a variance for less space than what they would have if they could have residential up top. So those are just a few comments. I just wanted to say that I'm in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience? Devin?
Devin, 115 Nelson, maybe it was addressed, was a little late, but my only concern is with snow storage. I'm sure these guys have probably thought about it a lot of where that massive pile of snow is gonna end up. I've talked with Spence quite a bit recently on, where's the property pin, threw a tape on it, did all that good stuff. I'm in support of this. It's definitely a great business to have. Robert's put a lot of time into this, I can tell from like designs and plans just to submit to you guys. And I think it's a great idea for them. They're basically moving into the next chapter of their business. And I think if planning and zoning wants to reject them here, then what are we gonna do for future businesses that wanna move in that potentially could be doing this via either residential and or commercial use? So, that's
Thanks.
what I got.
Scott, I believe we have a question we need to answer for Ken from a question about the distillery license
I'm not sure that's
of
really
variance.
germane, but,
We did say we would answer it, or I did, I apologize.
okay. Certainly applicant can address that if he'd like to.
Please, thank you.
Can we respond to public comment?
I would like to, I think Madison's right, let's get through all of public comment,
Okay.
including people online.
Okay, is anybody, and then we'll go back and answer. Thank you,
Correct.
Madison.
Yep.
Anybody else? Krista?
Can I just, I didn't get my full 5 minutes. So in terms of backing up trucks around that corner, anything that you would build there in those 3 lots there, that would be redeveloped is gonna prevent trucks from turning around there. It was, I don't think, ever intended for semis to be able to turn around and back down Williams. They talked about doing different directional things with Williams. And talking to CDOT about that, but if this was residential over commercial and you had that 30-foot setback and you had cars parked there, would you just plow over them with your semi? Like, you still wouldn't be able to turn around there, so I don't think this variance has any impact on trucks. Anything you develop there is gonna disallow semis to be able to turn around there and back down Williams like they do now. And it'd be kinda nice to not have them do that anymore, honestly.
Okay, anybody else? And I am going to read the few letters that came in, please, unless, Robert, do you want to?
I would just like to respond to some of the comments that.
Let's get through public comment, including online.
Okay, sure.
And then,
Okay.
Okay. This is from Frank Sanders. I am writing to express my opposition to the granting of the variance request of Eagle River Whiskey Company at 161 Main Street. This is not something the downtown will benefit from. It really doesn't fit in with the other businesses in the area, and I am opposed to it being built. This is from Sean Adams. Hello, Madison. Myself and my wife, Lindsay, would like to express our support for the 161 Main Street variance. We currently reside at 261 Main Street. This is from Hawkeye Flaherty to the Town of Minturn Planning and Zoning Commission, and dear Madam and Sirs et al., I am writing to express my opposition to the granting of the variance request of the Eagle River Whiskey Company at 161 Main Street. The town just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars updating the town community plan to create standards for the lots and buildings and a vision on what the downtown area was to be and look like. Now the first developer to submit a proposal can't live with the new guidelines and wants to develop their lot to their needs and their own vision of what the area needs to look like. They need to adhere to the new regulations. I am also curious as to why they are requesting a variance for a use that is not allowed in the mixed-use zone of downtown. Distillery whiskey is a manufacturing process, and the light manufacturing is not allowed in that zone. Lastly, please consider that a distillery is an environmental situation, similar to what Ken said, and he attached some information for the commission to read. I will not repeat that, since we've already gone through that. And did I get them all, Madison? Huh? 1, 2. Oh, here's 2 more. I'm sorry. Hi, Madison. Hope all is well. My name is Ashley Saunders, and I am a Minturn resident living at 440 Eagle River Street. I wanted to reach out to express my support for the proposed 161 Main Street variance application. Thank you for your consideration. Hey there, Madison. Just writing to express my support for the 161 variance application. Please feel free to reach out.
Say who it was.
Oh, well, I was going to do it down here. I'm sorry, that's okay. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. There's a phone number. Thank you so much, Justin Ross. And last but not least, my name is Brady Schlichting, and I own Evoke Outdoors, the bike shop at 102 Main Street. I've heard a little about the variance at 161 Main, and I'm for it. If I can help the business, I'm all about it. The owner is Minturn local, and all he wants is the best for the town. Thank you, Brady. I wanted to read those because I feel it's important when we can to do this, because this meeting is on is on recording, I'm sorry. So some people don't always get to know that. In this way, it's out there. And it's different with council because they can watch it on TV and they can learn where it's at. Here, we don't have that. So I thank you. Now, online. No one online. Robert, back to you.
Thank you.
Oh, close public comment. Robert, back to you. That's right, you said I had to do that first.
Thank you for reading those, Lynn. I think that is helpful. So while the zoning questions are not pertinent to the variance, I do feel like I should address them just a little bit. It's not an industrial project. If we ask for a conditional use permit, it's for light industrial, or light manufacturing, which is allowed as a conditional use in the 100 block. But it's not all just light manufacturing. We're proposing retail spaces on all 3 street frontages. And the main distillery floor will be open to the public as a demonstration space for how to do a sustainable distillery. So it will be, and there's also an event space in a mezzanine level over the tasting room in the front. So there is quite a bit going on that's, you could argue, is actually the display and marketing for this retail business. And to talk about the benefits to the town, it will be a substantial economic benefit to the town to have the sales of this product going through our tax base. Let's see. I think it was mentioned earlier, the need for the variance is kind of our first step. If we can't make this work, then there's going to be a lot of consideration about letting the project go or the property go to a developer. And then you're looking at probably something like I was showing with the ghosted-in structure over it. So yes, it's not necessarily an argument that justifies the variance until you start talking about the findings required. And this 3rd and 4th findings, it will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare, and then also that there's no substantial impairment to the public. By granting these, in fact, we're providing a better result than if someone were to build that project out to its fullest extent. There'd be more impairment on William Street if a terrace was built out to within 5 feet of the property line. There'd be more ice forming on Nelson Street if there was a 35-foot structure on 5 feet off of that street. So in those 2 points are covered, and then the exceptional extraordinary circumstance is that this setback was for residential use. There is no residential use proposed, so it's asking for a setback that is not relevant to this project. And then the exceptional also then the federal regulations are something which supersede any local regulations. So we're constrained by those. I'm not sure that Spence and staff were aware of this 30-foot setback because it is one of 3 lots in town. You know, with over 500 lots, it's an exceptional circumstance. Let's see, the variance is only for 1 year, and we are actually requesting for height limitations to be imposed on the variance. That no more than 14 feet for the first 10 feet, no more than 20 feet for the first 20 feet. So that bulk that we're showing for a 30-foot setback could not move to this 10-foot setback. We're asking that the variance be constrained in that regard. The licenses, I'll let Spence speak to. Snow storage, Minturn Market, parking. These are all issues for the town, which are substantial ones and need to be addressed. It is not Spence and staff's responsibility to address these issues for the town. Like I said, if someone else takes over this lot, there will be less room for parking. If someone built a dining terrace out into that backyard, they wouldn't necessarily have to provide parking if there's no residential. There would be what we're actually showing, if we can pull up again the site plan, which I think was page 23, 25, let me see. Twenty, 23. So this is Nelson Street, which is actually a 40-foot right-of-way, so it's quite an expansive street. We are intentionally keeping this corner open, and what is a loading dock, so it's not parking for general public. It's if they occasionally have a truck come in to pick up product or deliver supplies. And we're suggesting that as well as all of this area of William Street be paved with concrete pavers so that it has more of a pedestrian-friendly environment. And if a truck does need to back around through here, this whole corner is wide open. It's not impinged where someone, if they were to build it out with a terrace, that terrace would come all the way up to here, which would be a much worse situation for trucks and parking. And the occupant, actually this depth from Main Street, well, out to this point is actually identical to Holy Toledo. Holy Toledo doesn't have William Street as a right-of-way going through, but there is a pedestrian passageway that's about the same width as William Street. So there is a little bit of a precedent of how that depth is addressed. And as for the issues about sustainability, what they're planning to do will have zero effluent. There will be nothing going into the drain. If there is an issue with vapors or some odors, that kind of thing, it is a contained building. It's not like a whiskey barn in Kentucky that's open air and they rely on air flowing back and forth through. It's a climate controlled environment, so they can put filters on the building if they need to. They can address that. I don't believe that will actually be an issue, but that's feasible. So I think that addresses everything. Yeah, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Okay,
Do you want to address licenses or?
I can address the licenses.
please, thank you.
Spencer Bauer, 161 Main Street. So we currently have our DSP, our distilled spirits plant from the federal government. We also have a state license for manufacturing. That's in Meadow Mountain. So we already have a distillery in town. We already have our storing barrels. There's no fungus all over the coffee shop. A distillery pub license needs 15% of food to be. It's not about retail space. It's not about manufacturing. A distillery pub is just to have a full bar where they can serve beer and other alcohol. We will just have a tasting room attached to our distillery, which is a license that we currently have. So it's not about retail, it's about food, so you can have other alcohols in there. So we already have the current licenses. It's about a year-long process, thousands of dollars. We're already a manufacturer, federally a manufacturer, as per the state. So this would be just another property that would go into that current license. I think that's it.
Stephanie?
Might be quick, but I just wanted to say that thank you for all the comments about sustainability. Sorry, didn't mean to just stir but about sustainability, about safety, all of that stuff. I was a physician, I guess I still am a physician, and I care about this stuff a lot. We just got our Actively Green certification a few weeks ago, and we were supposed to get it presented to us today, but the accident prevented them from coming. We care a lot about this, and there's the stories all over the world that have done this in a way that's safe for their communities and their environments, and we really want to make this a place where we can teach other distilleries, especially of small size, how to do this well. And we have a lot of really great, wonderful, big ideas that we're going to do. But the simple one I just wanted to address was about the whiskey fungus. I don't want that on my house either. It's not in any way a pathogen to humans that we know of, but it's ugly, it causes destruction. of property. We don't want it either. The people that were in that lawsuit with Jim Beam just wanted them to put up air filtration to not let the ethanol come out. But Jim Beam won't do it because they want the fungus to come in to keep their flavor the way that it normally is. We have no problem putting air filtration in because we don't really have a specific taste that people are looking for just yet because they don't know us all that well. So we're happy to do that. We want to keep it clean. We have kids that live here and bike here, and we don't want to cause any problems. We really just want it to be welcomed by the community as something that's good, that's going to help out here. We really love living here. We've been here about 10 years. Our kids are growing up here. We have no desire to hurt anybody, and we just want to be as sustainable and as cutting edge as we can be as far as making distillery a safe activity and actually good for the environment.
Thank you. We need to go, I'm sorry, Ken, but we need to start with commission. Maybe something they'll say will cover. Shall we?
Can I see how
And then we're back. I'm gonna try to get this to commission, please and thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Ken, but we're really appreciative of what you gave us, but we need, I'm sure that people here need the time too. We're going on and on.
There are just a couple of things I could address real quickly that
Okay.
are germane to the variance. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So Ken, you had asked, can or should the town or does the town approve variances without knowing the business that can happen? First and foremost, the town can approve a variance without having a formal design review board application in front of it. Through the variance process, we require plans and other materials to demonstrate the proposed building typically. So we have those, but with regard to, there's not a requirement that the variance from a dimensional limitation be based on a use, right? We're considering a variance from a setback, so that really gets to and is supposed to be based on the proposed design of a building, which then gets to something that Robert touched on and that we certainly have touched on, I think, in the staff report in my response to some of Michael Boyd's questions about, should we be, what happens if the variance is granted and the lot sells or the building never gets built? Robert touched on this. It's really simple. This is a variance that would be specific to the rear setback, and it would be specific to the plans that were provided in your packet and to the town that do show a number of things. The placement of the building, the amount and extent of certain projections of the building into the 30-foot setback, the stepping of the building. Those are the things that go into the variance criteria and the findings. Is the applicant otherwise injuring the intent of the code? Is the applicant otherwise asking for the minimum amount of relief from the code or the strict interpretation of the code? So that's kind of a direct line between the design of the building, the siting of the building, and the request for a variance. At this point, we don't care what the use is, other than the fact that because of the use and because of the federal regulations that prohibit certain things to be happening in that future building, that is a criteria that I think we need to consider as part of the hardship, right? Or exceptional circumstance. I don't know if I've answered that fully, but yes, we can consider a variance without knowing for sure if the use is going to happen. All great questions, all great points, but I don't think that's the main focus of this variance application. And I think I just answered the other one, if they don't build the project, but the variance is granted, someone else could build a taller building there. No, this is again, based on the plans that were submitted, the intent, the letter of intent that is in the packet. It says, this is what we've designed. This is why we need the variance. This is our intent. So hopefully that clears those up. And I think those were the only two that I wanted to try to address right now.
It goes with that.
Okay. Kevin has a question.
Don't you also wanna just put it out there that what the lawyers said was that if, in relation to what Ken said, if the variance is granted and the building does not get built, it's a 1-year time frame.
Correct.
That's it. If it doesn't get built in a year, the variance goes away.
Completed or initiated?
It just goes away.
Initiated.
Initiated, so it's from today's date?
From whatever date
Whenever-
everything gets approved.
Yeah.
They have a year to
Or
initiate
like
it, or it
doing,
goes
right,
away.
like,
Let's clarify what the 1 year start and finish is.
thank you.
I think is what Amanda's saying, and I think it's where Jeff's going. It's not from today. Is it from the day the variance is granted or the day the project is started?
The 1-year time limit would start on the effective date of the resolution that approves it by council. So the council, acting as a zoning board of adjustment or appeals, would hear the variance next. Based on your recommendation, based on our staff report, based on the applicant's presentation, they're going to hear it separately, and they'll take action on the variance, at which time they will either approve with conditions, or deny the variance, right? So then there'll be a resolution that gets signed, so there'll be an effective date of, here's when your time starts. And they're good for 1 year, within which the applicant would be required and expected to submit a formal DRB application for the actual development of the site. Thank you. And a conditional use permit for the use, if the use in fact is a distillery and it's light manufacturing, which if you need me to, I can read them the definition of that in the code. And then that would effectively start that or stop that clock. So once they're, granted DRB approval and pull a building permit, I think that's when they've exercised their, probably the building permit issuance is when that.
Apply for the permit?
I think
Apply for
when
the
it's
building permit?
probably issuance. I can check with the,
I'm just thinking, how long is the process for the town from submittal till approval on a building permit?
typically not more than 3 to 4 weeks, right?
Okay.
Yeah, pretty quick. So it's completely reasonable that if the variance was granted in September, there would be a DRB application, review, submittal, review, approval, and a building permit within that 1 year time frame. But, that's not necessarily your consideration. That's up to them.
I would like to go back to what you said, because I did pull light manufacturing definition out, but you also said distillery. Would you please read those two for the public, please, and for the commission?
Well, light manufacturing means an establishment engaged in manufacturing, assembly, compounding, processing, packaging, treatment, or distribution of projects, I think it should say products, including primary product production from raw materials or production of services. I think that's where we fit in here, if it's a distillery, but excluding establishments which produce or emit toxic or noxious gases, odors, or fumes, excessive noise, vibration, or electrical interference, or similar substances or conditions onto adjacent or other properties, or dangerous to the comfort, peace, enjoyment, health, and safety of the community.
And then you said you had the definition of a distillery, which I could not find in our
I
code.
do not. I don't
okay.
believe I meant to say that. So clearly, light manufacturing is contemplated as a conditional use within the commercial zone district of the 100 block.
Where are you starting tonight?
Madam Chair, let me know if and when you want me to read this memo answering Commissioner Boyd's questions. I don't really want to do that, but I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think, well,
Why'd you leave it for last?
Well, you can read it all.
can I
We
just,
might cover a lot of that ground
You
anyway.
might.
we might cover a lot of the ground. There is one part in there that I think is interesting, but we can get, when we can get there. No, I won't open it now. We're gonna start with Amanda.
Okay, I always have a lot of questions. So really just focusing on variance, which is what is in front of us today. So there was an indication that this potentially is 2 lots combined, and we haven't gone through the platting. Would the variance still be required if it was, I could not would the variance still be required? Okay, yes, that answer is yes.
Yep.
Next, with the variance, there's height constraints. Can we also include conditional use constraints in the variance, so that the variance holds the same conditional use of light manufacturing? Or is that something that it's just the bulk mass piece of the variance, or can you also tie the use to the variance too?
I don't believe you can,
Okay,
and I would advise not to.
okay, thanks.
Yep.
You know, I always ask them questions. And then, I think, hold on, I have one other. With the transfer of a variance, again, it is time constraint. I think we just went through that. It's a year time constraint. Perfect. Okay, that was all my questions. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Daryl?
Mainly just Scott, two questions that I have. On the variance, it's saying first floor, single story, 27% increase. Is that what it's asking for, that variance? I'm seeing just reading here about the two different variances. One variance is the taller second story.
Yeah, and I wonder if
Explain that to me.
perhaps the applicant can walk you through that aspect of it, or Madison,
Sure.
if you want to jump in.
Be happy
But
to.
I think I understand what you're asking, but Robert might be better at explaining the stepping up of the structure and how much of that actually is into that 30 feet.
So if you could pull up page 26. And this goes to my comments about, providing height limitations at each step. Just roll up a little bit. So the existing setback, 30-foot setback is here. Here's the property line. So 30 feet is to here. We're asking for a reduction of that setback of 20 feet for the first story setback, which at this point, so from 20 feet out to 10 feet this is a 10-foot setback from the property line, this is 20 feet. So in that first 10 feet, the maximum height is 14 feet, which is where this eave meets with the building up here. And then from the 20-foot setback to the 30-foot setback, so then beyond 20 feet, the height limitation is an eave height of 20 feet, which is where this eave is. And then from there, the roof slopes away from the property line.
So this is self-imposed.
Yeah.
Basically.
So we're asking that there be a eave height limitation of 14 feet and then 20 feet for the 20-foot setback.
No, go in the variance.
So if we didn't grant the variance, you could go all the way up and all the way over.
So if you didn't grant the variance and someone else were to, can you scroll down just a little bit, Madison? So the bulk of a building, the code allows for an enclosed balcony to encroach 5 feet. So this could be the face of the building with an enclosed balcony, and an open balcony can extend out 10 feet. So the bulk of the building at the first floor would be back here, but could then step out and up with that profile. So we're actually, beyond the 20-foot setback, we're actually less than what the current code allows. And it's really just, you could scroll up a little bit. It's really just this chunk that is encroaching in the setback.
Okay. Okay. And you said that it is completely sprinkled?
Yes.
Sprinklers throughout?
Yep, throughout.
So, and the outside material, is that rock or what is that?
So we haven't settled exactly on every material, but this is shown as a stone masonry and then a stucco on the upper part of the building. So the lower portions of the building are stone, and then the front of the building is wood and glass. And then the second story has some stucco around the wood windows.
So fire-wise, it's less combustible than some of these homes that are with.
If a fire were to come through, it'd be the only thing standing.
And also I noticed that you got in between that building
Well, I'll go down there.
and the building over, let's see, Grammy's attic, you have cobblestone drainage throughout rather than any kind of combustible material such as shredded wood.
Sure, so if you could go to the site plan, which I think is 23. So we do have, a planting bed that's flush with the sidewalk here, and then raised planting beds in front of the building, a flush planting bed along this sidewalk, and then another raised planter at the back. So what you're referring to, this cobblestone here, is because with the solar array, there will be snow shed into that zone, so we don't want to make it inviting for people to walk through there with,
Okay.
so it's not a pathway, it's not, it'd be
But it's-
cobblestones to drain, so it could drain away.
But the point is it's fire resistant.
Yeah.
Less fire danger.
Yeah, there's no fire hazard in
And
on
then
the
the-
exterior of this building.
And then the odor is in reference to all the filtration systems or whatever you were talking about.
Yeah, and may I speak?
Sure, yeah.
So we've been to tons of distilleries to check them all out, see what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. And we haven't really found odor to be a problem except when you're actually in next to the fermenters and it smells a lot like a bakery in there. So I don't think it'll be much of an issue, but we will have air filtration placed throughout it, so I don't see that being a problem. But if it is, we'll address it.
As well as, okay, that's it.
And I just wanted to speak to the fire as well. We have a system in place that we're gonna place that will have tight automated control of all of the distilleries functioning. And so we'll know if pressure is changing, if anything's out of order, we'll know it well ahead of time. So the chance of any sort of fire happening in the first place will be really quite low.
Okay.
That's it, Jeff.
You gonna skip you for last?
I don't know if I have anything left to say. That's the lucky part.
Scott, stop me if I'm stepping out of line. First of all, I want to say that I think that the intent of the code that was recently adopted in 2023, correct? That's not that long ago. And I've been sitting on this council for a while. And my interpretation of what came out of that 2023 code, a lot of public input, a lot of consultants, a lot of our time, focus groups, etc. We sat here and we saw a lot of maximization of what could be built. And honestly, Robert, some of your illustrations and photo renderings of your building in relation to what could be built are really helpful based on some of the plans that we saw as conceptuals for that property and that whole block for that matter. That being said, I'm going to say that these opportunities, I've been here in this town for over 25 years almost now, and these opportunities are rare, in my opinion. And this is the good thing about us being a recommending body. We are not the final say in this. I really appreciate people coming out tonight and speaking, because honestly, there hasn't been a lot of participation lately. But so it's nice to hear what the public has to say. But again, the best part about that process is that we all have our voice. And some of the things that were said tonight and some of the things that are written in our code are subjective. And they can be interpreted. And that's part of the reason why I got on this board in the first place, was because there was so much room in our code for interpretation. And one of those would be detrimental use. What is a detrimental use? Well, that's like asking somebody about country music and rock music. It could be detrimental to listen to death metal, but it might be good for your brain to listen to classical music. I don't know. But it is subjective. And back to the opportunity, I think it's really, really important that the opportunity for this property to be built upon in a way that is not maximized is rare. You know, to have somebody come through, I've sat here and reviewed plans for years, and every single plan is maximized to the 16th of an inch of the height, of the property lines, of the impervious surfaces, of the lot coverages, etc. This plan is very, in my opinion, very thoughtful. And it's interesting that one of the comments about from Ken Halliday about it being an iconic building. That was exactly the word I wrote down when I started reviewing this, was that when I looked at that building, it looks like an iconic building for this town. It looks like something that you can be proud of, that is not maximized. It fits. It's very well done. It has so much potential to be something great. So it's not lost on me that this is an opportunity for us to do something right downtown in that 100 block. And there's no one right answer for what goes on in the public block or the 100 block. There's never going to be some perfect box that gets, all the boxes get checked and it fits everything and this is the best. It's never going to happen. But this is really close to it, in my opinion. As far as all of the things that have been said about the negative impacts and all that stuff, that is all going to come out in the wash, in my opinion, of the public hearings for the DRB, for the building itself, and the uses and the conditional use permit. We can talk about all that stuff till the cows come home. This is a variance for, you know, is this the right thing for that property? And in my opinion, it is. The parking, I don't think we're getting into the parking tonight either, are we?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Because that is something that is a little questionable, but we'll go down that road when the day comes. So I think there's a lot of things I could say that probably aren't specific to the variance. What we are tasked with is meeting all four of the criteria. And again, there's interpretation whether or not it fits. I think I would agree that 3 and 4 are, I think we can find that we agree with 3 and 4. The exceptional circumstance, in my opinion, I would say that what was the code that was changed in 2023 was a direct result of the maximized plans that we saw that were presented in the previous 2021 and 2022 and during COVID. And we saw plans that they looked like they should have been in Boulder. They had no business fitting in with the town. This fits in with the town. So I would say that I'm not going to go as far as to say there was a knee-jerk reaction to what is in the code now, but it was definitely a result of plans that we saw, and when we saw them in the bulk and the mass and the scale, and we saw the residential uses on the second and third floors, and it completely being maxed out, all for the reason that it's not financially viable if we don't get condos upstairs. Well, you know, that I think got everybody thinking as, wow, we got to do something, and it's going to require a huge parking lot to do it, and we're going to need these giant setbacks, and here we are. And this use has no residential use. It is a unique circumstance, and I think that it fits the bill for it to be considered for this. So that's it.
That's it.
And, well, I will also say, this also requires trust. And I trust Spence and Steph because they're neighbors, and I trust that their heart's in the right place. I've listened to plans that came through here and concepts of things that I didn't necessarily trust, and I trust this.
Okay, now I get to throw something at you.
Good.
Okay, that last part we need to strike because it's not a finding, but thank you.
Wouldn't be great if I didn't get struck by something.
I appreciate the building. I appreciate everything that everyone said tonight. My only concerns really is the 10 feet. Is that enough to keep the whole Lunar of concept going? 10 feet doesn't seems like a very minimal kind of space for walking, especially if we're trying to make a pedestrian friendly downtown. And also, I know the variance is here for a year and stuff, but if we look at 5 years down the road and if they move, or is that variance, I mean, it's still gonna be there, what's gonna happen in the future? And I guess that's pretty much my concerns. And the building, does it keep the same kind of, I know it's not probably part of the thing, but is it preserving the historical look of the downtown itself right now? I mean, is it changing it? Is it going to take our downtown and make it look different? It's a beautiful building, but that's just really my concerns.
Can I ask an administrative question?
Can she ask an administrative question?
Sure.
Okay, so if the variance, we talked about the variance start date that you confirmed everything. If they're in the process of building, so they've struck ground, done, started, do they have to come back and reapply to the variance potentially to a different commission, to a different council in the middle of building, or does the variance automatically extend with that building permit? So the building permit's good for a year, so they get the variance and then they apply for the building permit 3 months down the road.
Yeah.
Does that variance automatically then extend to the year of the building permit, or how does that work?
My sense is that once the building permit is issued and or they commence construction, that's when the variance itself would be perfected,
Okay,
which is a legal term.
okay,
I can check with Mike Sawyer, the town attorney, is it fully vested and is it perfected when the building is completed? And we've issued a certificate of occupancy and then your building is approved and your variance lives with the life of that building.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? But
yes, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't causing, overlap issues, because that DRB approval plus the conditional use could be a process, so I wanted to understand that. Thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask something that dovetails on top of that? If, God forbid, let's say this gets built and down the roads, they sell it, somebody comes in and says, okay, now it's not gonna be a distillery anymore. We're gonna change the use of the building and we wanna put condos up there. At that point, it's a non-conforming structure almost, because they would need parking, they would need things, they would almost need to demo the building or enough of the building to have parking. So how does the language of that and the variance apply to someone down the road that wants to change the use?
I think the answer is what you just said.
They would have to conform.
I think they would have to conform. if the building gets built based on a set of plans, and a
And a
variance
use.
granted that is based on a set of plans, and that 20 years down the road, changes hands, changes use, I would say the variance in effect would no longer be valid. It's another thing we can check with the town attorney before this goes to the council, just to, because that's a good question. I think I know the answer, but I think you're right. Either the proposed use in the future, if they wanted to add residential, would require removal of encroachments into that to accommodate parking, unless the guidelines have changed by that point. No one's driving cars. There is no parking standards. I'm just saying.
Could you turn that back bit into a garage?
Yeah, I mean, you could. I could see you designing, but to your point, I think it would have to come into conformance with the then enforced code, whatever the zoning requirements are, setbacks, design guidelines. That variance would maybe no longer be valid.
I just feel like this is probably something that will come up at council.
Yeah.
Because we all know that our best dreams and intentions, are great, but the reality is reality. And I hope that the business, goes on forever, but things change, and then all of a sudden, I would hate to have like this, we made a decision to grant something, and all of a sudden it's now like, oh man, we really stepped in it because someone came back and wants to put a second story on the building and tear the roof off and put a bunch of condos, because that's what the economic climate needs.
Right.
That's what we approved.
And that's what we approved, and they're like, well, legally, they have a right to do it because they got a variance and they don't need to conform anymore. I don't know. That's what they do.
I think there is, if you think about it from the standpoint in 3 dimensions of kind of how Robert was able to describe this through modeling and the ghosting of structures, if the variance is granted and there are height limitations self-imposed that become part of that variance, so this is the literal box or the cube or the
3-dimensional.
3 dimensions that you're building within,
Yeah.
Good luck. Go do that, right? If the plans change substantially between now and when the building actually starts construction, then there's an issue, right? Is that variance still valid? Do they have to come get a different variance? Do they have that's a bucket, and I don't know if we need to answer tonight. But to your point, if someone 20 or 30 years down the road has different plans for that, and assuming our guidelines have not changed at all and that 30-foot setback still exists, and the variance was created with these height restrictions, they might be able to do other things on the other portion of the lot that isn't subject to the variance, that has additional height allowed for it. So there still might be additional future uses that could be granted through the DRB and building permit process that do fit within the guidelines, that don't require a variance and that have no bearing on this variance at all.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's just like, to go back, we can't go back and see how the enclave got built because there's no records.
So their self-imposed variance or their self-imposed limits on height, that is just for them though, that's not for future buildings, right?
It is.
It is.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Because if this were to be granted the way they're requesting and the way we're interpreting it and acting on it, a variance from a 2-dimensional lateral setback in the rear, in addition to height restrictions within that 30-foot setback area, right? So they're asking for encroachments into that 30-foot setback variance, but they're self-imposing these height restrictions. That is the box or dimensions within which they or a subsequent owner need to build a building.
Yeah, and I think to that point, like whatever it is that we consider, there's always the intention of what we're intending to approve or deny. And hopefully those intentions carry and nobody comes back years from then and go, well, actually your intention was great, but it's not legal.
Right.
So is the variance attached to the combined two lots, or is it or the variance attached to just a singular of the 161 Nelson or 16?
Right now, because both lots have been subject to the variance request and because we noticed separately for each of those lots,
Okay,
I think effectively there'll be a variance for each lot.
for each lot, okay, thank you.
And this goes to one of the questions that Commissioner Boyd had, which was, do we need to combine the lots before we're considering the
Yeah.
variances? No, we don't. The code doesn't require that. We, in practice, through the DRB process, review designs for new homes quite often that are on lots that have, or properties that have two adjoining properties that haven't legally been combined. We condition those and say, before you go for building permit, you will go through the subdivision process and combine these two lots, because this is how we've reviewed it and this is how all your lot coverage has been calculated and all these other things on these two lots. Same principle applies here. So in any recommended motion to approve this, we are recommending that you're also attaching a condition that the applicant successfully complete not only DRB and conditional use permit, but go through an administrative platting process with the town to combine the lots.
With that first DRB condition, do we need to make the condition that it's the DRB with the height restriction in there? Or, because right now the way that the condition reads is that it's just a DRB application.
Mhm.
It feels like that's a little loosey. We should probably,
I don't know if you need to, I hear what you're saying, and I think normally I would say be more specific.
Yep.
Because the variance application itself is specific, and because the variance
got it. I got
would
it.
be
Yep, no,
based on the set of plans that were proposed, that is a material representation by the applicant. That's what you're voting on,
Okay.
and that's what you're considering in the different findings.
Okay, thank you.
So.
for that clarification. Sorry,
It's okay.
I always have administrative questions.
But see, when I do this way, I get to get rid of a lot of my questions before. It's kind of selfish. I did have concerns about some things tonight. Ken, thank you for bringing some of the same things up. One is because having had a store on the corner opposite of this for 14 years, I know the traffic issues. Somebody please close the marijuana window.
Yeah.
We don't need skunk in here.
Contact.
And
Oh, bummer.
that is an issue the town is gonna have to address if this building goes in, because the things that happen are amazing. I mean, semis going down in front of the hotel pull right in back of where you're talking about building. And they inch back and they pull forward, and the railing goes up the hill by Krista and Devon. Then they get out of there, that's not gonna work anymore. Also, I would warn you about that corner, and perhaps you might wanna put some of those posts like by Devon's house in, because cars coming around. Come 4:30 in the afternoon, everybody who's going to the Thai restaurant to pick up their takeouts, same thing happens. And they all go in there and they all do a U-turn. I would love to see half of the U-turns that happen in downtown disappear anyhow, so, because they're quite dangerous sometimes. The issues we have to deal with though is where are we gonna do our deliveries and how is that gonna be accomplished? And that's something the town has to talk about. The other one is the snow that's been used for snow storage forever. There still might be a little room back there because the two empty lots to the other side of you, but there won't be as much. And you're gonna have to be dealing with the cars that go in and out to the bunkhouse. Those do U-turns back there sometimes too. Sometimes they pull in and then back out. But that is a major concern. I love what you did with the height limitations, because that was my major thing at the open house. I remember you asking me, what is the one thing you think is most important? And about the people of the town. People don't want the tall buildings here. You solved it. Thank you. I have many more questions, but I think they will come when the DRB comes up. I do want the commission to, not that you have to use these, but just on page 2 of the response to Michael Boyd, there were a couple things that Mike Sawyer said. If you would just reference them to yourself and see how you feel before you make a motion.
Which one again? Oh, we got it.
Not that you need to, but be aware. Is everybody? Yeah. Okay.
I make a motion to approve the variance for 161. Oh goodness. 161 Main Street and 161 Nelson Avenue. With the condition that it requires a successful completion of a formal design review board application and requiring successful completion of administrative subdivision process to eliminate any common lot lines between the two lots and combine the lots into one lot.
May I have a second?
Second.
We have 2 seconds.
You can have it, Darryl.
Motion.
Madam Chair, just a discussion point. Amanda, did you intend to include the CUP with the DRB requirement? I don't know if we provided that in the.
Conditional use permit.
Yeah.
Correct, yes,
sorry.
and the conditional use permit, thank you, sorry about that, Scott.
Okay.
I'll go with that.
Okay, motion with the man, by Amanda, second by Daryl. Is there any further discussion from the commission? Jeff?
No, other than yes. Other than just saying that I agree,
Well, let's take a formal vote on that then.
from,
And Eric gets to, yeah, we have to go through the formal vote. If
Okay.
there's no further discussion, we'll take that. Eric, you do get to vote tonight. Eric? Michael's gone, so Eric gets to vote tonight. Amanda?
Aye.
Aye. Daryl, aye.
Lynn? Aye.
Jeff, aye.
Eric, I.
Thank you so much. Sorry it was such a long evening, but I feel like everybody got to vet their issues, and that's what's important to me.
Thank you.
It's important to make it public what we're trying to do. And
Yes.
I think the questions helped us to give a chance to
Yeah.
express what we're after.
And, you know, the thing is, I have found, especially being downtown for many years, there's so often people on the street seem to know more than I knew being here in this position before I even knew about it. So I like to make sure everybody gets their say.
For sure.
And transparency is out there, because it sometimes clarifies issues too. You know, I think there's issues that will come up at DRB yet too. Be prepared.
Well, and we'll be better prepared for those too.
Thank you.
So,
Thanks.
Go ahead.
I think we'll talk about it.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. If anybody wants to stay around for the rest of the meeting, they can. It's only 7:30.
I think I already saw the whole next issue.
I'm going to check.
Ken,
It's the stuff
That
you
seemed to
do,
take
historic
place by
preservation.
request, and I knew, you know, something like access to it.
Can't wait to gavel somebody. There's nobody here.
I hardly ever get to do it, so why not make use of it?
Actually, I'm so mad.
The Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of August 28th is resumed. My name is Lynn Teach, and I will be recusing myself from the discussion on historical preservation because I was part of that meeting. Thank you. Take it, Jeff. Here's your chance.
I feel so important. Okay, we are moving on. Lynn didn't leave me with the agenda, so I know we're moving on to the HPC. Does anybody have a printed agenda for me to go down? Thank you.
Agenda.
Do you want me to introduce this?
Sure.
All right, the request tonight is to make a recommendation, to review and make a recommendation to the town council to approve Approve with modifications or deny ordinance TBD Series 2024 and ordinance amending Chapter 16 zoning and Chapter 19 historic preservation of the Minturn Municipal Code. The Town Council and the HPC conducted a joint session on July 17th, 2024 to discuss options to help give property owners certainty concerning historic preservation. At the June 5th, 2024 meeting, Council discussed balancing historic preservation, economic feasibility, and the utilization of property, particularly in the town's downtown commercial generating area. In response to this, a work session was scheduled at the July 17th, 2024 meeting. During that work session, staff brought forth 9 different ideas for the council to discuss and give direction on, and staff was directed to bring back an ordinance addressing options 1 through 7. Are we going to go through each one of these tonight?
I was planning to at least give you descriptions of each of the options, but not all of them are relevant to you, as some of them are specific to Chapter 19. So while I'm perfectly happy to talk to you about how we arrived there, that is not technically within y'all's purview. So you can ask me questions, but making recommended changes to that portion of the ordinance would have to be, you can do it, it would just have to be taken under advisement, given that that's not technically a chapter that y'all oversee.
Right. So I would say, first of all, I guess, do we want to go through everybody? Does anybody have any comments, planning commission comments first, or did we open it up for public comment first, I guess?
If you want, I can go through the ordinance and then we can open it up to public comment and then planning commission comment.
Yes, please.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So as Jeff helpfully said, staff got direction to bring back an ordinance addressing options 1 through 7. Option 1 is to eliminate the requirement for 2 sets of design review guidelines. That was addressed within the Chapter 19 portion of the ordinance. Option 2 is to eliminate potentially redundant approval requirements. Again, this was addressed in the Chapter 19 portion of the ordinance by amending the definition of alteration, thereby setting a higher threshold for somebody to then need to apply for a certificate of appropriateness for an alteration to a historically designated building. As seen in the ordinance, if you're not touching 50% or a designated facade, then you do not have to go through that whole HPC process and can instead go straight to DRB. Option 3, to allow for historically designated structures in the downtown corridor to have the immediate ability to function as short-term rentals on all floors. So that is something that is within Chapter 16. That is the amendment in all of the use tables to allow short-term rental with that tiny little asterisk to say that if it's a historically designated property, it bypasses the 2-year requirement and can function as a short-term rental, as well as specifically within the 100 block zones, you can function as a short-term rental on the ground floor, whereas previously no residential uses were allowed on the ground floor unless grandfathered in. So that's how we addressed option 3. Option 4, to encourage historic preservation reinvestment as part of the Downtown Development Authority operations plan, is not something that's addressed in this ordinance. That is something that we will be hopefully encouraging the DDA, should the DDA be approved at election, to consider setting aside funds to potentially direct towards maybe grants, or maybe the helping of buying down on plaques or renovations for historically designated buildings, as in their tax increment financing, they can give direction on the funds that they take in. So that is an option that we are certainly promoting, but is not technically addressed within this ordinance. Option 5, to require a minimum of 2 nominators for a structure to be nominated for historic designation. That is another one that is addressed within Chapter 19 section of the ordinance. If you'll notice, staff went through and did some interpretation saying requiring a minimum of 2 nominators or the property owner, so that the property owner doesn't have to get an additional nominator, given that it's their property that they're nominating. But if you also notice, staff went through and struck through HBC member or members. We struck through the members so that you don't have multiple people from the same board acting as nominators because they are a portion of the same board. So instead, it'll just be one person from a board is able to be a nominator. One person from town council is able to be a nominator, so that we can hopefully get a more diverse outlook and opinion on what should be historically designated. Option 6 is another one that is not technically addressed within this ordinance, to create a process whereby property owners can determine if their structure would be historically designated without necessarily supporting such a designation. So that's something that we'll actually just go ahead and add to the nomination form. There has been a lot of concern expressed that, hey, we want to figure out once and for all whether or not we're going to be designated. But that doesn't mean we actually want to be designated. We just want the certainty one way or another. And so the property owner can submit a nomination application, check that box saying, hey, I don't actually support this. I'm just trying to get an answer. And we can go from there. Now, in cases like that, staff has already contemplated maybe bringing a fee to council when it comes time for the budget, because if somebody is not in support of a designation that they're submitting, staff will likely have to then go through and do research in order to either support that, hey, there's nothing here to designate, or hey, based on this research that staff did, there is actually reason to designate this property as historic. So just to give you a heads up, doesn't really have anything to do with this ordinance, just letting you know kind of staff's thought process. And then option 7, to allow residential in the downtown character on the back 50% ground floor of historically designated commercial buildings to create live-work opportunities. So this is this one specifically is in regards to Chapter 16, but it is also changed from what council gave staff direction on versus what the HPC gave staff a recommendation to amend the ordinance. So originally staff had taken this option 7 extremely literally, saying that only 50% of a historically designated structure, whether it's 500 square feet or 1,000 square feet, you could only take the back 50% of that structure, even if you had a whole, 1,000 square feet on the back to build on. Based on the recommendation from the HPC, staff has amended that language to allow the 50% of the back ground floor total. So if somebody built on the back of the lot, you could take the 50% of that building area as a whole. If they did not build on the back of the lot, then they could only have the back 50% of the existing structure. And so that is how that has kind of morphed from, the discussion at council through HBC's recommendation last week into the ordinance that y'all are seeing tonight. Other things that have changed from the ordinance that went to HBC to make it to y'all, we have amended the definition of alteration. Originally, staff had not proposed anything like the designation of a facade, but there was concern brought up at the HPC meeting that, well, what happens if you don't touch more than 50% of the exterior architectural features, but the things that you are touching are extremely important in keeping with the character of that building. The example that was brought up was the bay window at Helen's house. If somebody just wanted to take off that bay window and put in like a sliding glass door or something like that, that wouldn't be 50% of the exterior of the structure, but it would change the way people interact with that building as a potentially historically designated structure. And so staff then actually added a new section, or brought in a new section into the ordinance to allow HPC to recommend and then town council to ratify or amend that decision during the nomination process to actually identify a primary facade to that it would be much more difficult to touch or alter without getting that certificate of appropriateness, even if it doesn't meet that 50% criteria. Another recommendation was to add the visual example. So I'm hoping that the example was legible and readable and helpful. I actually worked with Robert Creasy on that. He was extremely helpful. I had a vision in my head, but actually getting that onto paper, I am not an artist. So this is the first official kind of, I brought it to the HPC for them to view just on screen. It wasn't part of the ordinance, but I certainly welcome any comments on that, given that this is the first time that this has actually been a part of the ordinance. And then we amended the intent statement of section 16.635, 100 block commercial zones. So that is something, again, that's specific to y'all, to add lodging as a use at the street level, because we are now proposing to allow 1 short-term rental on all floors, and 2, to allow lodging on the back 50% of a historically designated structure or lot. Since the intent statement had previously only said retail uses, that's all that was allowed on the ground floor. Within the intent statement, we certainly don't want to be running afoul of that because intent statements do matter. So we added that clause. And then I actually got a comment from Lynn in her capacity as a Historic Preservation Commissioner. The third, or the 3 asterisks after the Old Town Character Use Table should actually be saying within the 100 block instead of with the 100 block. So that is something that I would hope that I could get a recommendation to change between tonight and council. So that is my extremely long presentation, probably extremely convoluted. I apologize.
Do we want to, let's start with Eric. Do we want to talk about any specific options here?
If I could get public comment to be open first.
First, all right, let's open to public comment.
Thank you. I have no public comment.
Nobody on Zoom.
Nobody on Zoom.
Okay, we close public comment.
Thank you.
Let's start with planning commission comments. Eric, do you want to talk about any of these options specifically, or questions?
I don't really have any questions. I just really, I just know that our buildings need to be preserved as much as they possibly can. I do really like the the reinvestment as part of the downtown development authority operations plan. I do feel like it needs to be more visualized. I think people need to understand like the history of the town, and giving them the funds to do that would be very beneficial for the town.
Yeah. Daryl?
Option 5. You're talking about the 2 nominees and all that kind of stuff. Currently, it's just 1, isn't it?
It is.
Okay. And that could be from like someone off the board or someone on this board, or
It can be pretty much anybody who has a stake in the town. So a member of HBC, council, planning commission, a member of the public, somebody who has a business here. It's extremely broad who can nominate. And so given how broad it is, and also that we don't require the consent of the property owner, council thought it better to have more than 1 nominator so that there would be actual, not necessarily actual, but that there would be more push need to have this structure designated if somebody could get somebody else to joint partner with.
And will that be what we'll be addressing?
That is part of chapter 19, so that's not technically under your purview.
Okay, so that's not necessarily what we're going to be addressing.
No, it is in the ordinance that y'all are forwarding a recommendation on. So if you have concerns, I would certainly welcome to discuss those concerns through. And if you would like to make a recommendation to change the wording that's within the ordinance, we can certainly discuss that. But chapter 19 is technically not within the planning commission's purview. So I would advise questions to be more in an inquiring role rather than, hey, we need to change this. Because
Okay.
it's
No,
not
I
technically.
don't have any problems with it, I just
Okay.
wanted to clarify it a little
Yeah.
bit for me. That was about the only one that I had, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Daryl. Amanda?
So I just have a question. So this is more, so council asked staff to kind of build out these options based on a lot of conversation. So the content of the options is not really of concern. It's just whether you guys addressed their request
That's correct.
adequately.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Thanks, Amanda. My only question is, regards to the use tables. Did anything change on the use tables, or you're just, besides the little asterisk things?
So we added short-term rental as a use within all zone districts. It technically is now within chapter 7 that governs the short-term rental code. But we specifically added it within the use table so that we could put an asterisk next to it saying that, hey, if this is a historically designated property, it exempts the 2-year requirement. And then within the Old Town Character Area use table specifically, we went through and put asterisks next to all of the residential uses within the 100 block zones so that we could have that asterisk that says if this is a historically designated property, the back 50% of the lot can utilize accessory dwelling units, etc.
So like our 2 empty, like historical houses on 151 and those, so those can now immediately be used as short-term rentals.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And those changes in the use tables really only apply to historic properties?
Yes.
They don't apply to anything else?
And I would like to clarify, when I said that's correct, that's only if they do become historically designated. They have not been historically designated. Council has continued that public hearing until they take care of this ordinance so that people can know one way or the other what they're getting. So if they do become historically designated and this ordinance passes as is, then yes, they can immediately become short-term rentals. If they do not become historically designated, then they cannot.
Okay.
Great.
I think that covers my questions. Is there anybody else? Go ahead. No? Okay, then let's entertain a motion for ordinance TBD series 2024.
Do we have an option of tabling approval of this ordinance so we can go listen to council's discussion on those staff directed options? I just feel like I'm really uneducated on the council's like kind of thought process on especially the short term in historical buildings in the 100 block.
That is always an option for you. I will say that the bulk of the discussion happened in work session and was not recorded. Because we don't record work sessions or video work sessions. There was a little bit more of discussion during discussion direction, where we officially got, because staff can't take direction within work sessions, so we officially got our direction during discussion direction at that July 17th meeting, but the bulk of that conversation would have been off camera, so I will say that.
Okay, it just feels like that's a little bit different than some of the community plan, which was residential and short-term were on second floor. Just seems like it's really at odds with the community plan, and that's why I'm asking, just I feel like.
I'm not saying it's not, and I'm not saying it is. The guiding principle for this ordinance and why this ordinance was put together is one that we have a potentially extremely cumbersome process for a member of the public to go through. If somebody went the longest route possible from wanting to alter a building that's over 75 years old and took the most circuitous route, you would be going through 6 processes. You'd have the 2-week stay where you put a sign to the property saying, hey, this is a potentially historic building that I'm about to alter. You have the nomination process, which has to go to HPC and council. You have the then certificate of appropriateness process, which is required for any alteration, the way the code's currently written, not with the way that this ordinance is written. That requires HPC approval and then going on council consent. If that certificate of appropriateness is denied, then somebody could then apply for an exemption, which again goes to HPC for approval and then council for consent. And then assuming that that exemption was approved, then you'd have DRB and then building permit. And when the HPC looked at it, because the way this whole started was they wanted a flyer that would be easy for people to understand, and staff started mapping out all of the processes and figured out it's not easy to understand. I mean, I work with it quite a bit, and so I'm familiar with it, but Michelle, even though she was there with me and the attorney putting this whole chapter together, as somebody who hasn't used it as much as I have in the past 2 years, even she was getting lost, and she was part of making it. And so we brought it to the HPC saying, hey, this isn't easy. And so especially with the 151 and 155 designations and the uncertainty specifically within the 100 block, given the development pressures that we are seeing on some lots, slash the selling of real estate within the 100 block, it was decided by council that we should have a work session to discuss options to either streamline the process, make it easier, make it more decisive. I don't know if y'all have been keeping track of council agendas within the last few months, but this will be the third ordinance concerning HPC that I will have brought to council. Each one trying to make things more certain for property owners so that they don't exist in this gray area of, okay, I'm trying to sell my property or I'm trying to do something with my property, but I have no guarantee that I can do what I want to do, even if it's a use by right, because the structure on my property is over 75 years old. Specifically, I mean, with 478 Eagle River Street, which just went to HPC a couple months ago and thus council, the property owner bought the property and immediately submitted a demolition permit for it, and that was immediately flagged, and somebody submitted a nomination application,
For
which then 478 Eagle River.
Okay,
And so that then caused almost like a 2-month halt to, what they were trying to do, and they had just bought the property and they weren't anticipating any of this. Not to say that, we're trying to get rid of the process entirely or anything like that. I believe that council still believes that historic preservation is definitely still a goal within the town, but I think the goal is to streamline things as well as potentially provide incentives such as the ability to operate short-term rental on all floors, the ability to have just general living arrangements on the back 50%, so that it's not nearly so cumbersome to have a historically designated property, particularly within the 100 block, where we're getting feedback from property owners saying, this is great, but I can't do much with 750 square feet. The only way to make things viable is to have either short-term rental or the ability to build housing on the back or on top, or however it is, because when land is going for $1 million, like for 3,000 square feet, then people understandably want to get a return on investment. And so this was a way that council believes could provide incentives without necessarily throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So they would be specific to historic structures, and while it might come crossways with, the 100 block design guidelines or the uses technically allowed currently within the 100 block, in the fact that we don't currently allow any residential on the ground floor. This was a way to hopefully allow people to maybe be excited about historic preservation, or at least not think, oh my God, somebody's nominated my property, this has been designated, and now I can't do anything with it.
So with us approving the ordinance, can we approve the ordinance minus options for rediscussion with the council? I'm just trying to understand, like, cause it just feels like this is, again, not in line with the community plan, which is part of what we're supposed to do with planning and zoning, which is, just feels
Right,
disjointed.
you can certainly make any motion that you'd like. I will say that given that this was direction from council to implement, I don't know that there would be a different outcome if we pushed this ordinance or subtracted out different options.
Public comment will still be within when the ordinance gets read.
Yes, yeah, the ordinance has 2 readings. Any discussion had tonight, any discussion held at HPC, will be included in the memo, and talked about, just like I did with the discussion at HPC and the recommendations that came out of that, tonight. And then obviously, any ordinance has a public hearing, and so people from the public, even, you as commissioners, though we certainly, once a commission has made a decision, it's understood that that commission should stand behind that decision, in the face of other boards, during public comment specifically, but you can certainly attend as a member of the public and give public comment there as well.
So, that being said, I don't know that there is, I don't know that there's a way for us to approve, I mean, it says that we can approve the ordinance, or we can approve the ordinance with modifications, or we can deny it, or I think we have the opportunity, if we want to table it to a date certain, that may only delay the inevitable. If, you know, like you said, these are coming as direction from council to staff. So seems like we have to put some trust in the fact that they have asked for these options, assuming that everyone's taking good notes and they've had work sessions and, you know, this is what they've asked for. Whether or not option 3 conforms to the community plan or not, I feel like is up to the public to come out and say yay or nay for. And since it is only specifically appropriate to or applies to a structure that has been designated and gone through the process, which I think from my understanding is like, it's a long process, and 2, I don't know how many
How many structures are approved in the 100 block?
well, there's only a couple. I mean, the water tower, nobody's gonna short-term rent that.
Now.
And
Wait.
cool,
Just
as cool as
wait.
it could be, to go spend a night inside there would be cool, but, or record a record. The 2, Uptown store and, Lynn's old store, those are still in process. And, you know, Helen's house, I think it's already been.
It is not.
It is not, and it may never be, who knows? But I don't think that this necessarily applies to too many things right now. And I think it's gonna be challenging for most structures in town to make it through the gauntlet.
Would it be Grammy's Attic or the mattress store? Would that be it?
I think it's technically over 75 years old. However, there are questions about the structural integrity of that building
Right,
that might preclude it from being designated.
okay.
I think part, you know, and not to get down the rabbit hole, but I think for most of these structures that are pre-1949, to be structurally sound, to make it through the gauntlet of even qualifying and getting the historic designation, to then get turned into something that would meet building code for a short-term rental, good luck. That's gonna be pretty challenging to bring that building up to code where you could rent it to people safely, and prove that it's, you know, meets all the electrical codes and plumbing codes and building codes and fire codes. That it would be a significant investment probably to say to, we know how much money went into Helen's house, right? And it's probably one of the most well restored properties in town. And so I don't know that we can, without just striking option 3 from, and just saying that, we don't feel like it meets the community plan. We could say that, and if they want to throw it back in, that's their prerogative,
That can certainly be a recommendation, absolutely.
right? So if someone wants to make that motion to strike option 3 based on the fact that we don't necessarily feel like it meets the community plan, then we're just a recommending body for the 100 block. Yeah, and we're just a recommend.
Specifically.
Yeah, we're just a recommending body, and it's up to them to listen or not.
Correct, okay. I will make a motion to approve the ordinance with the strike through of option 3 due to the fact that I do not believe it meets the community plan for the 100 block specifically.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
And any further discussion? Let's take a roll call vote.
Amanda, aye.
Daryl, I.
Eric, aye.
Jeff, aye. Good,
We're good.
okay.
Thank you very much.
And we will
Good.
ask Lynn to come back. We would like to ask Lynn to come back.
Make me feel warm.
Settle down in there in the audience. And I'll turn the gavel back over. Sure was fun.
Okay,
Don't get any ideas about retiring.
from this job.
Mhm.
So do we need to say anything on Eric's, that was pre-approved? His windows? That was just something you gave us to see that it was a minor.
We haven't gone through the draft Article 5 yet. We haven't gotten to staff reports.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Don't try to put more work on me, Lynn. I did my job and I'm gonna just coast from here on out.
Go through staff reports, Madison, please.
When we get to that point.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Oh,
Still
okay.
have-
Oh, yes, here we go, Minturn forward draft.
We got the heavy lifting yet to do.
Well, we've gotten through 161, and we got through the ordinance for HPC.
That's right.
Now we go to Minturn forward draft article, land use application requirements and procedures, and it is 5 after 8. So let's see what we can
Get through.
get through.
Hopefully we'll get through the rest of this article.
Right,
We have to make decisions.
right.
Well, let's see what we do. Matt will not be joining us tonight. He is in Africa for a couple weeks.
Sweet.
Where is he?
Africa.
That's amazing.
He has been there, I think, 3 times in the last year and a half. He fell in love with the country and has also fallen in love with someone there. So
Oh, wow,
No.
hopefully he doesn't move there permanently and we don't see him again.
what part of the country?
You're allowed to share that information.
We're digressing.
Out in public.
He has interest there. No, anyway,
We're on page 77.
77.
thank you.
77.
This is yours.
Yes.
Okay, 77, section 16.5, 130, planned unit development. Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we left off, we made it through several sections of the new draft Article 5. Just as a reminder, that is an entirely new section that will lay out the purpose and intent of each different land use application type, the submittal requirements, and then also making the process clear for applicants and for us. So we made it all the way through the zoning variance and had some great discussion and feedback about the variance process itself. And now we're on to the PUD section. I'm gonna try to follow Matt's memo that he had provided for all of us to kind of guide us through the major changes and his comments on, as the person kind of digesting our existing code, dissecting it, and then reconstructing it for this purpose. what his thoughts are. So it goes without saying, his first bullet point there is just talking about our existing PUD requirements or regulations, and the fact that they are fairly disorganized, that can be confusing and ambiguous. So there's a lot of opportunity to make these more clear, have some more consistency with regard to submittal requirements for each step, the concept plan for PUD, the preliminary plan for PUD, and then the final plan for PUD. So as I believe everyone is aware that a PUD is a planned unit development, that's when someone, rather than following a straight zone district like commercial, multifamily, or multiple use or residential, decides to create their own zone district. And so there's, with a planned unit development, there's a development plan that shows where buildings and other improvements go, along with sometimes a subdivision application. So with a preliminary plan for PUD, you'll also get a preliminary subdivision plat, so you can start seeing the layout of lots and streets and all those things. And then, what was I going to say? The zone district amendment as well. So in order to get a PUD approved, you also have to change the zoning from residential or commercial or mixed use to PUD, Belden Place PUD, Minturn North PUD. So they effectively create their own zone district with their own standards for setbacks and things like that. We, in the planning world, deal extensively with planned unit developments. They are kind of a response to the fact that most zone districts don't allow a lot of flexibility. Some jurisdictions are trying to move away from PUDs by updating their zoning codes to make their zone districts more encompassing and allowing more uses and a little bit more flexibility in things like setbacks and building height. And you see some of that in our 2023 community plan, where we spent a lot of time and a lot of paper trying to put in place policy direction for us when we get to the zoning part of this exercise, to really look at our mixed-use zone districts, to encourage and allow for a different mix of buildings and a little bit more flexibility. Again, trying to do work on that end, so we might actually see fewer PUDs in the future. So with that, Matt has, I think, done a really nice job of trying to standardize things like, in a PUD, the standards for common open space. We have existing language in our PUD sections. We probably still need to work on that. We need to discuss that maybe tonight. Things like that, standards for approval of a concept plan or a preliminary plan or a final plan, and being consistent across each one of those. If there are variations, another reason for a planned unit development to get the flexibility that a developer is looking for, they're also asking for variances from the underlying zone district. So if someone is proposing a PUD within a residential zone district and there's very rigid setback standards or building height standards or whatever the standard is, the PUD is kind of synonymous with a kind of a bucket of variation requests. So the PUD, the developer might be asking for a little bit different way of calculating or looking at setbacks or building height or things like that to get this design flexibility. Those are usually tied to some end goal. So in order to request a PUD or variation through your PUD process, you're showing the town that you're providing affordable housing. Because of the variation, you can be more creative and you can therefore produce more affordable housing. That's usually a reason to grant a variation, or to provide some other public benefit like trails or open space or things like that. So Matt has taken some of our existing language and placed it in these different sections that are now laid out. But I'm not entirely happy with our existing language and some of the language he came up with, so I'm going to keep working on that with him. I'm going to stop there. That's a lot. And this is a really important part of our new code. even though my hope is that we can get to a point where we're actually seeing less or fewer PUDs, in reality, there's not a lot of large parcels that are going to get master planned in a PUD fashion. We might see something like that down in Bolts Lake. There may be some larger tracts or, people that compile multiple lots elsewhere in town and want to do a PUD. But we're also in this draft calling out that the minimum lot area or the minimum acreage for a PUD would be 2 acres. So that's something we need to talk about too. I don't think there's necessarily a minimum right now. I think it has to be,
I think it's like 3
Equal.
combined lots or 5 combined lots
yeah,
within that zone district. So if the 100 block is 2,500 square feet, you could theoretically do a PUD on like 7,500 or 10,000 square feet.
yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna stop there. We have now sections that deal with the concept. I want to talk about that a little bit. Preliminary, final, and then he also added some new sections and some new language that try to clarify minor PUD amendments and what that means and what kind of minor PUD amendments could be kind of administratively approved without coming back to Planning Commission or Council, and then major PUD amendments. Amanda, I think you had some concerns over the new language of minor PUD amendments when it gets to bulk and mass and stuff, so we'll talk about that. But overall, I really like the direction that Matt laid out here. It's gonna be, once we work through some details of how this is worded or specific standard language, which standards apply to the approval of a PUD, I think we're heading in a much better direction, much more clear for applicants, so.
Okay. We have Scott's presentation. Amanda?
So my questions, I didn't have that much in this section, but so the first one has to do a little bit with the common open space and park. We're excluding areas that have a 30% slope in the exclusions. It's like, so, and the way I understood that is, so if they're designating, they have to meet the common open space requirement. They cannot include portions of their property that are 30% slopes or greater. And I was trying to visually, and maybe Jeff probably knows, of a piece of property, so like the property that we were designated, like within the North PUD, I thought that was almost at 30% or greater. Or was it
I don't think so.
over in the North PUD, like what was the slope of that lot that they
I'm not sure
dedicated
which,
to us?
the lot C or track C?
Track C, yeah, I'm just trying to get
Definitely
a
not
visual.
30%.
Okay, that's not at 30%.
I don't know if you remember, there was another parcel that originally was part of that PUD that's kind of that big hillside on the north side of Game Creek.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
Down where the.
That's
that's the
30%.
phase 2, that's like phase 2,
It probably
Yeah.
will never be developed.
yeah, but
Um,
that's
but-
30%?
I would say there's 30 to 40% slopes there.
Okay, great, okay, I just wanted a visual of what that was.
So that's basically saying you developer can't take credit for
Something you can't develop.
something you can't develop. I want to talk about that though, because
So do I.
yeah,
Because I feel like you can develop, you can dig a lot, look at Wild Ridge.
right. There's plenty of lots there that are 30% slope or
Just
greater.
because you can't build a house on it doesn't mean that you can't utilize it for recreation.
Exactly, I just wasn't sure about it.
So if you wanna dedicate it as a developer, if you were the owner of that parcel and you said you wanna build a PUD down in the flat part of it, and you wanna dedicate the whole hillside
As a mountain
as an
biking.
open space and put a trail up there or whatever, I would play devil's advocate and say, why can it not be counted?
If it were designated on a plat within the PUD itself as non-buildable or as open space and or under a conservation easement, is that where
Then
we're
you
heading?
can't dedicate it.
Then you could count it if it was permanently if the intent of the developer was to use it for open space purposes and never have it developed, I could see it counting. I think that would incentivize people to do the right thing.
But underneath this, it's not allowable, and I think it should, like, could we just relook at this language?
We're looking at it right now, and this
He
is the
wants
kind of
direction.
feedback
I think it should, I think there should be strike it.
Maybe you can add the language
78.
like you just said, that if you dedicate it permanently, whether it's, I guess it would be platted that way on the easement,
Uh-huh,
right?
yeah,
So you put it on your plat as part of your PUD and you'd say, I'm dedicating this portion as open space for recreation
Mhm.
perpetuity.
right.
Then it seems like at that point, you should be considered and you could qualify.
What does everybody else think of that?
I like it.
I like it.
So we're striking that 30%.
Well, it's, I guess at this point, it's a recommendation for us to put that over in the other column areas that count and come up with the right wording. And you're gonna get another look at this whole,
Yeah, and then
Document.
council's gonna get a chance to
Okay.
chew on it too.
I had a question about the same kind of thing. Like when it says areas that count for the public park recreation purposes, you're including critical wildlife habitat areas. Is that a place where people will have recreation, or that should be kind of reserved for these wildlife areas that should be protected more than actually have people come in there and be a part of that?
right, good, really great comment. I think it's kind of in the same vein, and we have, I think we've got some room to really be more clear.
Yeah.
Because if we're on the one hand saying that areas of 30% slope or greater could actually count if they have wildlife value and are, or some other value and they're gonna be protected, why would we wanna introduce passive or active recreation in areas of critical wildlife habitat? And that counts, right? So there's some crossover there, but I think to your point, we need to be really clear about this counts, critical wildlife area, riparian area, if it's protected appropriately.
If it's protected
Yeah,
appropriately.
totally.
And in what you're saying, the wildlife area over by Minter North is elk, pretty much, where that comes down in there on that side. The wildlife area in Malloy Park area is marshland. That's very important, because there isn't a lot of that. Over there, you want to protect the elk too, but maybe over there you allow a hiking trail. Around the marshland, you don't do anything.
This goes directly
You can ask Devin
to,
Duvall.
There you go, or what, yeah, Devin Duval, that's what I'm thinking of.
so this goes directly to one of the reasons for a PUD, which is to allow a developer to be more creative, and usually that is synonymous with being more compact. Maybe streets are a little bit narrower than our code requires and things like that, so they can protect sensitive lands and things like that. That's one of the reasons why you can grant variations to road standards or setbacks or whatever, right? You're literally squeezing more into a smaller space to allow for preservation. That's the whole idea behind PUDs in most codes. So if we can get a little bit more clear on what we're trying to achieve by requiring a certain amount of open space for that purpose, that's one thing that I think we can do better at. The other thing is, actual active recreation space within a PUD for people that live there. Specifically, if it's a residential project that's gonna have kids living there, right? So we need to strike that balance and be clear, because right now other codes have a recommendation for usually 25 or 30% open space, right? But then they have hard and fast requirements for a minimum amount of acreage for open air active recreation. I don't think ours is quite there yet. We do talk about, let's see here, all common open space park recreation areas must be constructed and fully improved. So we talk about those things. But again, I think we need to be really clear about our intent. The reason why I bring that up is I'm dealing with a PUD that's going through a process in Eagle County right now. And it's a parcel and it's a project that can never, ever meet the county's land dedication for open space because the county requires a certain amount of acres of open space for active area, and this parcel doesn't even meet the lot size. Like, you know, there's no way that this building could provide that much. But when you look at the overall lot and how much space is being provided within the parcel itself for the residents that are going to live there, it's a really good use of the space, and we actually exceed 25%. So there's projects where you will never have the ability for a developer to dedicate acres of open space because their project is so small, but they're going to provide open space in other ways, thinking of pocket parks and play areas. Belden comes to mind. So I'll stop there, but.
Well, to your point, I found this language in here to be, you know, one of the major changes from this language from the existing language is that the current code, correct me if I'm wrong, but it says that the 25% open space is a recommendation, not a requirement. It's a very big distinction. If you're on the developer side and you're in that situation where you're trying to work in a code that Eagle County says that you're required X number of acres, and so there's the box that you have to check off, but you can't. And yet you're showing a lot of very good solutions to provide, to your point, very active space that for the residents, et cetera. And so, you know, if it doesn't work on paper and doesn't meet the requirement because it's a very hard line, you know, right now we don't have a hard line, and this language is a hard line. And, you know, if certain projects come through and they're showing active, you know, spaces and pocket parks and things that they're trying to meet the intention, and yet they may not be able to meet the 25%, you know, are we painting ourselves into that same corner?
Yeah, and I think we are, because that's what this language says, it's a
Right.
change.
So, you know, I feel like it would be nice if we could somehow get some language in there that is a requirement, that you're trying, you're showing that you are doing something, but you may not be putting a certain number to.
There may also be projects that are in proximity to parks or other open space that need to be considered. We certainly have had applicants use that in their arguments to say, well, we're
Yeah.
Yeah.
but there's some truth to that.
I know that one.
Scott, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Daryl?
Oh, okay.
So recreation standards in number 5, it says recreation standards, but throughout the rest of the document, it's referred as recreation areas. So can we make that consistent?
Where are you?
So on page 78, number 5, we call it recreation standards, which I don't know what that is. Everywhere else, we call it recreation areas. So even when we go down to like ownership and maintenance, it's recreation areas. Throughout the rest of the PUD and the minor PUD, it's called recreation areas.
Well, is this just saying the standards?
No, it's just
know.
saying what
What is the requirement?
what can and can't happen.
But then after that,
But
it's,
even there, it says all should comply with the following common open space, park and recreations. So it should say recreation area standards then. Recreation area standards versus recreation standards. It's
That could
either
be, that's
leaving off-
better. Yeah,
yeah, they're
recreation
leaving off
area.
the name.
I see where you're going.
And then the other pieces I could not really locate, and maybe it's just because I'm what, you know, sometimes my head is foggy. I couldn't really locate the definition of common elements as it's defined, that they have to provide, like, the HOA or nonprofit has to provide responsibility for it. Like, it doesn't really define.
Well, in the bottom of page 78, where it says that is responsible for the ownership, administration, operation, maintenance of any common elements, parentheses,
Yeah, but
open space, parks, recreation areas, private streets, etc.
I know, but it feels like we probably need a better definition of common elements.
And make sure that's in our definitions.
It's a
Yeah.
big list. I mean, it's gonna be tough to be all
But
inclusive.
what about utilities? What about like,
Yeah, those are not common.
are those not, but like those, the common like, I don't know, I mean, or do you think that's a sufficient list?
I don't know, Scott and Madison could probably say better, but it's, I feel like it's one of those things where the more you list, the more things you might miss,
Yeah,
right?
I think
So
it's-
you don't wanna get into a situation where like,
Yeah,
well, it doesn't
yeah,
show
I
up
hear
here.
you.
Okay, so I have one question on that as an example. So you say space, parks, recreation area, private streets. In the case of Hollywood Heights area, what about the parking lot that is going to be put in there for trailheads? For a trailhead,
It's a public amenity, is it not?
is that in
That's
public?
dedicated
yeah, it
to
won't
the
be,
town.
I think common elements is really, I'm not gonna put I'm not gonna put words in Matt's brain or mouth, but.
Well,
maybe
because
that's where
he
he
goes
was
on to
headed was-
say that this entity is also responsible for securing adequate liability insurance.
It's typically things that are run by an HOA.
And
That
that's
are
not going to
literally
be run by the
dedicated-
HOA. Okay,
So
Dedicated
it's
and owned by the HOA
Yeah.
within a PUD
not- Common
subdivision.
elements are specific to a PUD that an HOA manages, that people pay dues for, to own and maintain, and if it's a public
so then
amenity.
who would own them?
The
the
HOA.
Yeah.
And you know, if you put, if it's a, for instance, if it's a park in the PUD and it's got a playground equipment, they have to have liability insurance for that, probably for the kids to play on it. And only the people that live in that development pay into that HOA dues to insure that.
So I'm thinking like more out of the box, so like if you have a common element, like that they dedicate like a in like an indoor space for community like
The
groups,
community center.
like a community center, or like it's like a, you know how like some of the like a joint use room, I think we have one of those, like
It's either something that's owned
it feels
by
like
the
it's,
town.
yeah,
it's
or
owned
no,
by-
no, no,
it's privately
in,
owned.
yeah, private, like a private joint use, so you know the what's that, the
Travel club.
travel club has the club. Like that's a common element, but I don't feel like that's necessarily defined here, like I just, it
Nor,
feels like,
nor would we want to define it here.
because isn't that run by the HOA?
What we want, this is really not the place for, I hear what you're saying, and we can provide a definition in our definition section for
Okay.
a common element, because
Okay, that's it,
okay,
thanks.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Daryl,
Back at that open space thing, just question, you listed water bodies and wildlife stuff. Do we have to list the other stuff, such as golf courses, pickleball courses, da 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 da?
I don't know why we couldn't.
You know, that it's, you get into just that golf courses, pickleball courses, tennis courts, da 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 da, various things like that. We're starting to list things, I just was wondering if we'd list other things.
Okay.
The small thing at the top of that box says areas that do and do not county towards. How about count? Well, why?
Oh, yeah.
good catch. I like those.
And then over on page 85, it's talking about the, number 6. That the town is responsible for, let's see, the facilities. Does the town charge for the PUD for the cost of the maintenance of the facilities and how much do they charge? I'll let you read number 6, I won't read it.
Yeah, let me get there.
The remedies authorized section?
Yeah. Yes.
What's the question?
My question is, once the town is having to take over this, are we supposed to pay, the town's supposed to pay? Who pays the charges to the maintenance of these facilities?
I can add a question there about whether we need to get specific about who pays. I think it's implied that the applicant would pay, the town would bill them back. But it doesn't say that, so. Does that answer your question? Because I think, am I understanding your question? We go in and remedy the situation, but it doesn't exactly say who's gonna end up footing the bill for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And is there
Yeah, the cost of sole responsibility of the person.
And the last one I have, continued maintenance, number 8 there,
What page?
page 85. The cost of the town maintenance shall be paid by the owner of the property. In the BUD. Do we need to state a rate that they have to pay? Or is that
No.
just subject?
That would, so I think actually, if I'm reading this correctly, if remedies authorized allows the town to step in and start maintaining, then continuing maintenance where it talks about the town is not gonna pay the cost, but the property owner will. I think that's answering your question.
Yeah,
Okay.
tax lien.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
Okay, that's all I had.
the cost would be whatever the cost is.
The cost, just whatever the cost of it.
Yep.
Not so much a rate
And
or
then the
anything.
town would present the property owner with a bill, and if they don't pay it, then they get a tax lien on their property.
Okay,
And is that well, obviously that tax lien goes to when we started maintaining the property, like when the planning director exercises those rights to, what is it?
I think what would happen is there probably would be, well, it even says this, there's a notice of violation, basically,
Yeah, that's what that would.
right? And we give them a period of 30 calendar days to cure the deficiency, maintain their open space, and then if they don't, then we can probably declare that they haven't, and they're in violation, and we're gonna step in, and that's probably when it starts, and then we'll keep track of the cost from there on in.
There are currently code enforcement letters going out like that right now.
Ooh, sweet.
To clean up yards and things like that. I know somebody who got one.
Kevin's on it.
Kevin is on it.
Let's go.
Kevin's on it.
Here.
I'm done.
Page 82, please. Can I have an example of number 17 up at the top? So I can understand it better.
Maybe applied annexed land or other land not zoned by the
And
town.
not zoned by the town without the requirement for underlying zoning.
Enter North. Didn't have underlying zoning.
Correct.
Who did?
Minter North did not have underlying zoning. We just kind of stole Game Creek zoning from right next to it.
Gotcha.
So one of the things that Matt and I have discussed, and we also discussed it with Mike Sawyer, in some jurisdictions, a PUD is handled as an overlay. So if it's residential zone district, but someone wants to do a PUD and vary their design from the underlying residential zone district standards, they overlay their PUD on top of that. And we can allow, or a jurisdiction can allow for certain variations, and then they get their PUD approved. And if that PUD ever doesn't get developed and effectively gets expired, becomes expired and extinguished, and the PUD goes away, the underlying residential zone district is still there and someone can have a reasonable use of their property moving forward. In other jurisdictions, Eagle County, for instance, the PUD and in this town, even though we use the term overlay, once you get a PUD approved, that's your zoning. The underlying zoning, if there is underlying zoning, goes away. What you have for development rights is your PUD. So we've had some really good conversations. I think the preference and the recommendation from staff is that we don't do overlay zone districts because they can get kind of confusing and messy to administer. If you get a PUD approved, just like every other PUD in town, that's your zoning. If the PUD were to never happen and it gets extinguished, there's a process that we need to build to allow that to happen, where the applicant can go through that process to extinguish their PUD. You know, things didn't work out, we're not gonna build it. We'd like to revert back to our pre-existing zoning and make it pretty easy to do that. Or the town council can do that. So they
On
can,
their own.
yeah, if the PUD has expired, if their vesting period, the period of time which they have a right to develop the PUD comes and goes and they don't lift a shovel, and it's therefore expired, then we would start the process of extinguishing the PUD through an ordinance to undo the previous ordinance, and at the same time revert it back to the pre-existing zoning. What this says, like you said, Minturn North was a PUD that was approved in an area that had PUD holding zone, no effective uses. There are absolutely, literally no uses allowed in the PUD holding zone. It forces someone to come to the town on Union Pacific Railroad property for a conditional use permit or a PUD.
Nothing was defined.
Right. And then this is also accounting for lands that could be annexed into town that might have no underlying town zoning. They were in Eagle County and they were resource zoned, but that has no effect in our town.
Well, and didn't we find another one when we were going through the community, no, through the zoning
Cemetery.
plan at the south of the town that was like that,
Yeah.
that was lost somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
and then can, a definition for wet water, please, and can you see that we put that into the
Wet water,
Page
page
83.
83 under number 6?
I wanna know actually what dry water is.
it's, that's fluffy paper water.
That's,
Water on
I know what wet water is.
And I assume, does that mean what comes out of your faucet or just what comes out of your I mean,
No, that is
Water rights.
water rights.
water rights.
You have water rights that are actual physical water.
So we should define wet water in this section, or do we, is it assumed somewhere?
83.
Yeah. So page
83, number 6.
61,
Yeah.
water.
Water.
Eliminate the word wet.
Well, no, there is a difference between wet water and dry water.
Yeah.
Wet water typically has to do with senior water rights. That's going to be the water lowest down in the river. You're pretty much always going to have water in the river at that point. Dry water typically sits much higher up on the riverbank, and so you might only have water during runoff period when the river is much higher.
Kind of like at Homesick, what they have up there, if the water reaches those diversions, that's dry water.
And you have dry water rights versus,
They're typically delineated more by junior water rights versus senior water rights. But when identifying whether or not, because your senior water rights could then be superseded by other senior water rights or California. And so in order to actually have water brought to the table, it needs to be wet water.
So to your point.
Senior water rights.
So we can define that.
Irrigation may be allowed that creates incentives for applicants to commit a water augmentation plan for senior water rights. If you have those, we like them.
We like it. Thank you. Go, Jeff.
Me? Really? All right. We did, let's go back to we're on page 82. Let's go backwards one page. G2B, minimum yard setbacks. At the bottom, it says, as a general guide, 20 feet between buildings shall be considered the minimum appropriate spacing. Typically, our code says 5 foot side yard setbacks. And which kind of could say 10 feet between buildings. So this is a big change. Is that intentional, and why?
I can't answer that,
Okay.
but I will make a note to revisit this, so.
You know, and I guess that could be something that might have been in the old PUD, because I mean, I have 20 feet between houses on both sides of me. They've got 10, I've got 10.
Yeah, but the code says that you probably are in a zone that says that you could have, that it's a 5
Nothing,
yard.
you got it.
It's a 5 foot typical side yard is like the common one in town.
Mm-hmm.
So most people, if that have been, with their DRB reviews that have been coming through, are built right at 5 feet.
Minimize the
And
effects
overhanging 18
of
inches into you.
transmission of noise between
Okay.
units though.
So I've made a note to get back with Matt and discuss this one.
Okay, just as a general one too, back to the open space, the 25% thing, that shows up again on page 100, number 13, and it shows up again on page 110, number 13. So that 25% open space as a requirement shows up 2 more times that I found.
100 in the packet?
100 in the packet
Okay.
and page 110. Both number 13 on both of those pages.
What was minimum side setbacks on Minturn North?
They varied.
They vary, but generally probably 5. That's the only way you can get that 6,000 square foot house. 2 water towers. What is that? Are you okay?
Still trying to find the right page.
So page 100
100.
and page 110. 100
Number 13 on 110.
and number 13 on page 100.
Okay, it's actually one page, 178. Got it. No,
I mean, I'm just going off the page numbers of his draft document,
78.
so.
Number 13, right above it.
Oh. What are we doing with that?
That's the 25% required.
Got it.
Yeah, it just shows up again.
Got it.
And then on page 97,
Is 97 still in where we're at? I think we're going on to the
Yeah.
next.
well, I mean,
We haven't finished.
I was saying just
Yes,
saying we're
section
leaving
16.5.
Yeah.
We usually go through it section by section.
Right, but the bullet point, or as represented in Matt's memo, is addressing 130 through 160.
yeah, I mean, it's all like
Comments
PUD
on those 3
related.
sections.
It's all the same stuff.
Oh, well, I just went through the first one with my questions.
Well,
I may have to go back to it.
I'm gonna take my opportunity.
Take your opportunity.
On page 97, number 8, engineering plans and reports.
Oh.
It references, I think we, like, normally, or maybe now, like, we've been talking about a percentage of It says the following documents will be prepared by a qualified engineer. It doesn't really talk about the percentage of construction ready that we want them to be.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're kind of currently working under that kind of guise. And I think in the future, we should probably state it if we're gonna hold people to it.
Yep.
And then it also talks about, or it does not talk about whether or not I think it talks about the engineer's opinion of cost, but it doesn't show up until final in this document. And it seems like that's something that we want earlier in the game. So maybe that's something we want to put in this section,
Okay.
the engineer's opinion of cost. And then on page 98, that was all, like, we also are kind of working under that CDOT access permit. If a PUD requires, because it talks about in this section, the impact of the PUD on existing traffic volumes and traffic patterns, including data for the increases in average. It doesn't necessarily, I don't think, talk about whether you have to have a traffic study in this section, or if you have to have the access permit at this section, but I think we're working under that as well right now, so we may want to include that. Page 115. Yeah. Number 9, the notice and recording of the decision. I'm asking, why are we not referencing the plat in this section? As it applies to preliminary and final. There's nowhere in here where it kind of talked about the plat, and it seems like we're also kind of currently working under this, like you have to have your plat draft in earlier in the process than what this document is providing for.
Can I go backwards and just ask a clarification, Jeff? 'Cause
Yeah.
you're going pretty fast. So what you're saying is like on page 97 with the impact reports and the engineering plans?
Yeah.
That you expect to see both the traffic impact is underneath the impact report, but then we also have the traffic study, so it'd be in both sections?
Well, it talks about the traffic study in here. And then, but it doesn't say anything about your CDOT access permit. If typically in a PUD, like if you're changing the use of the property
Yeah,
from what it currently is to something theoretically bigger.
yep,
Normally, if it's touching Highway 24, usually CDOT requires you to have a new permit. They want to know that you're changing the use of the property, and now you're gonna have 10 townhomes instead of 2 duplexes. And so you're not necessarily gonna be able to, you're gonna need the traffic study and provide it, but you might also need an access permit.
okay,
You may need CDOT's approval to do what you're planning to do. And normally the town would wanna know that you have the authority to do that
yep,
in CDOT's mind before the town says you can do it.
okay, I got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, Jeff, relative to your comment about final plat, I think up in the, either, not necessarily the purpose section, but somewhere up at the beginning of that, I think we should, because I think Matt and I talked about language that talks to, and this might be at the start of the PUD section, the concurrent applications for PUDs that include the subdivision of land, that they are expected to track with a plat. A
Yes.
preliminary plat and then a final plat.
Yeah.
But I think why this is not mentioned under final plan approval is because we're focusing on the zoning separate from the subdivision, which will be handled under subdivision regulations. But I think you bring up a good point. Do we need to, in this particular section, at least reference a plat that might be tracking along with the final plan?
Yeah, it just seems like it nowhere speaks about the preliminary plat and the final plat anywhere in here. And those are currently processes that you have to go through. And so I just, if it's not talked about in the interest of trying to make it streamlined and easy for developers to understand what they need to do, it would probably be smart to at least reference it somewhere.
Do you know what a plat is?
Plat's like the big plan, you know, of the property and the boundaries of the property and easements within it that goes and gets recorded at the county.
It's a legal document that creates lots and
Subdivision.
common areas that are not lots and things like that. It's a subdivision.
It's like when we look for Midterm North every time, all those spots on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
On the PUDs, like, we're using the exact same language for the waivers as we are for the rest of the types of applications. And I'm just reminding, from our last session, I think we agreed that all waivers would go into like the planning commission, like report, like staff report, okay. And we can still we put a new, we're adding clarity that we can call up any of staff's report to planning commission at any point. So if like there's a waiver that you do on a PUD, it would show up in that report and we could say, hey, you waived traffic impact, why'd you do that, Scott?
I do what I want.
Exactly. But okay, but that is what we I just wanna remind myself, that's what we had talked about last time, was like any of those waivers, regardless of the application, will go into the staff report and can be called up by
Yes,
planning commission.
you got it.
Thank you, sorry.
just a couple more. Page 117, A to B. Changes in both location, siting and or bulk of structures and the height or character of buildings if required by circumstances not foreseen at the time of preliminary
Or final plan.
final development plan approval. These are under minor PUD amendments, which this is a new thing.
Somewhat new.
Somewhat new. I guess, to me, changes in bulk and height or character of buildings, it's kind of a big deal. I question whether that would be a minor or a major. I would personally consider it probably more of a major, unless it was like a couple inches or something, but if it was like the bulk of a structure, that's a pretty general term, and it scares me a little bit in terms of the getting, you know, staff approval of something like that would be a little suspect. So I'm just bringing it up.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Amanda. I think you were heading down that road when we started reviewing this section last time.
Yeah.
Duly noted. So what Matt did to combine the existing language that in the current code, it says certain things are minor deviations or minor amendments. And then these other things like bulk and height and character can be brought to the planning commission. So if you want to keep the existing language that basically says these things are minor, they can be approved by staff or the planning director. But these other things, including bulk of structures, height or character of buildings, either need to come back to the planning commission or can be put in front of the planning commission at the planning director's discretion. So if we use the wrong discretion and don't, and then you guys call it up or something, I don't know how that would work, but is that how it says? I think does it say it can be?
The thing that's
have to
weird,
notice it and go through a planning commission hearing.
well, the thing that's weird to me is the language that says, if required by circumstances not foreseen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what those are. or what those would be, but
Right.
it's just funky language that
Okay.
I don't really know what that means.
So the current language is minor deviations may be approved by the planning director. And those that may be authorized are those that appear necessary in light of technical or engineering considerations first discovered during actual development, that are not reasonably anticipated during the initial approval process as long as they comply with this code. Minor changes in location, siting, bulk of structures, and height or character of buildings may be authorized by the planning commission if required by circumstances not foreseen at the time of final or preliminary plan was approved. Changes in use resulting in more intensity of development, major rearrangement of lots into areas not previously containing development, overall increases in development intensity or density, and decreases in the area or provisions for open space will require approval by the town council following the procedures. However, certain submittal requirements shall be waived if determined by the planning director and deemed unnecessary, given the information already on file with the planning department. At a minimum, a revised development plan shall be submitted showing the proposed changes to the plan, and so that's what's currently in our code.
It's a lot. I mean, I understand that the intention of this is to streamline that. So I think that's what that clause is kind of trying to sum up in a smaller package. But I guess I'm just flagging it as to only because it's followed by the next statement, which is any amendments which are not a minor amendment shall be considered a major amendment.
I know, like, it feels like I just feel like we should be taking the locations and bulk structures and height out of that point B.
Yeah, take B all the way out of it.
Uh-huh,
Put it back into the major.
Yes.
I mean, I think it should be a
Yes.
major, but that's just my own humble opinion.
I mean, you're changing the location of a structure. You're changing the bulk of a structure. You're changing the height or the character of a structure.
Those are all pretty
Those are all
important things.
seemingly
Pretty
pretty
major.
big deals. In a PUD that you've put a lot of time into,
Designing.
arguably years of time into why it is the way it is. I don't know how it would be circumstances not foreseen. Usually those circumstances are economic climate. Right?
Yeah.
So I came in and I presented a PUD and it was for this, 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 and this, and now that there's a different person in the White House and the economics have changed and now it's just not very feasible, and so now we wanna do something different, a la some other projects we might know about. And it goes from 150 units to 35 units,
Theoretically speaking.
theoretically speaking.
Or it goes from 35.
Obviously, that's not a minor change.
Or the reverse.
No, that's not, but I think we know we beat it to death.
So I think if we got rid of B but kept A, I would still want to work a little bit on A to further define what kind of technical or engineering considerations.
Yeah.
Usually that is what it is, right? They missed a detail on civil engineering drawings and there's some change to an engineering plan that is not going to change the character of the PUD. And sometimes you have that kind of language in this section that says, and doesn't materially change the character of the PUD or the intent of the approved final plan.
Yeah, that's
Right?
exactly the intention, and this is saying the opposite.
Yeah.
This is saying that if you do change the character, that's still a minor. The way I read it. So I think that, we just need to tighten up that section. And then my last one is on page 125, which is related to sign decisions. And to go on Amanda's point, I think that it would just be nice to have some language in there that says that those kinds of decisions should just be included in the next P&Z agenda as a staff report. That's now called, quote unquote, staff decisions.
Jeff, can you restate that? I'm really sorry.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
I think we put it at the top where it says like we have the general section at the very front.
Yeah.
General provisions, I think we indicated like above, like the where we have all of the land use application types that any waivers would, to any of the above would go in staff report. I feel
Well, it
like
just
that's-
doesn't, this section,
Are you wanting like any signs approved since it doesn't come to us?
it actually comes
with
back, it's more on page 129, honestly, I think I got that wrong. It's number 5, where it talks about the administrative decision. The planning director shall review the application, determine if it satisfies the review criteria, and then it can be administratively approved, or, which is, I think, what's happening now, right? And I think we're just saying that in there, down under step 6, the notice and the issuance of the permit, we should just include a sentence that says that, quote unquote, staff decisions will be a new heading in the next, P and Z town council agenda as a staff report item, or, similar to what shows up on a town council agenda as a consent
Agenda.
item. There's just something that shows up in our meeting that says, okay, by the way, last week we approved these 3 signs. This is obviously just specific to PUDs, but and then I think that's it.
I didn't realize we were going through all the PUDs.
I'm sorry.
I read like 2.
I didn't either, so we're gonna go back and I was gonna ask that, do you mind?
Going through the whole thing?
No, if I go back to them in case they came up with any more, because I thought we were going through it section by section. Amanda, do you have anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. You?
I had a couple of them on page 97. And this is under 8. And we're talking about adequate water rights and all that kind of stuff. And should we have something about the impact report or water conservation report? Any kind of conservation idea?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. So
The way-
plans,
The way water is getting so valuable, it'd be nice to have them to bring that out. We're conserving by da-da-da-da-da.
so under C, plans for potable water, irrigation water, sewer systems for the PUD, including
A
water
conservation.
conservation or water budget plans or something
Right,
like that.
yes.
Great suggestion.
I love it.
And there was another spot in reference to water too. Let me see if I can find it. And this is on page 110. Application review criteria. Add there a review water conservation criteria. Just add that. It's not in there, but just add it. And that's the only 2 I had.
Those are pretty high value comments. Thank you.
It'd probably go down like between 12 and 13, huh?
I do love the fact that we require all the impact reports, but we don't actually require them to remediate the impact reports if there's any impacts identified. Fantastic.
So.
Sure.
Which one was that?
Oh, so we like, and I think this is just standard in any code, but we require the impact reports, but we don't require remediation of any findings in the impact report.
Well,
It's like implied, it's
It is
implied, Scott,
implied that-
it's implied.
you get the report, you discover the badness of whatever, and then you place
Do
an
not pass
addition.
go.
Potentially, but we don't say you do not pass go.
Okay, we're gonna give Eric a chance here. Hopefully we will finish. How many other pages are there to the PUD? Not much, right? And then I suggest perhaps we think of meeting tonight. Oh, we have a few things we have to cover yet.
Yeah, we still have sign permits and master sign program and sign variants.
So let's,
Jeff's already talked this. Jeff's sign. Jeff's
I
already.
already started talking about it. I went through to the end.
Came into the end, yeah. For the PUD, everything's been talked about, I believe, that I have highlighted or written down. Am I going through the whole thing?
well, yeah, it's your turn, so whatever questions you have that nobody else has done.
I was just really sitting on that PUD thing.
So from the PUD through the rest of the document, I think, if we've gone through PUD, then the next sections are sign permits.
There's minor PUD.
Minor PUD.
Major.
Touched on some.
Yeah.
There's major PUD, there's sign permit, there's master sign program, and sign variants. So throw comments at me. Any of those sections. Just let me know which section you're talking about.
Okay.
No rush here.
No, I know, we just went through everything, so I was super focused. I guess I wrote a note here on page 110 on the application review criteria. When it gets to the development in the PUD will be consistent with the community plan and reflect the character of the town. Is that too far in the process? Should that be in a process that comes before the preliminary development plan?
Well, great question. The final development plan will have essentially the same criteria or standards as the preliminary plan, unless we decide that we want some different standards or criteria for a final plan.
Do you know what I mean? Should they get that far in the process and then we come up with some other standards that they have to change a lot of stuff?
Yeah, I guess on the one hand, Eric, it's expected that the final plan is not gonna vary much at all from the preliminary plan. The final plan stage is when they're literally, just final details. It should still be consistent with the community plan, and I think that's what this is saying is, you've already demonstrated that you're consistent or complying with the community plan, and you were approved a preliminary plan. Because of that, things shouldn't have changed and you should still be, right?
So we've already addressed that.
I guess one other way to do this for application review criteria is it's substantially the same as the preliminary plan that was approved, and we don't need all these, but I guess unfortunately this is kind of standard for other jurisdictions, that when you get to the final plan stage, you basically say the final plan is subject to the same approval criteria as the preliminary plan, which kind of doesn't make any sense because you've already decided those things.
Okay.
So I see your point. This is not set in stone. If you or other planning commission members are kind of confused by this, like why do we rehash the same criteria? Why can't we have a list that is half as long, that really keys on the final plan is in substantial conformance with the preliminary plan that was just approved? Maybe that's the way we handle this.
But it's always good to go back to.
Yeah.
And we do bring up in preliminary plan, application review criteria number 1 is still development in the PUD will be consistent with the community plan and reflect the character of the town. So we're not waiting until final plan to assess that it's in line with the community plan. We're just reinforcing it at final plan that it's in line with the community plan.
I had a question on the traffic too, like on the page 98 on the top. Has there ever been a study like how much traffic actually can be on Highway 24? Is there a max? I mean, do we just keep seeing what is built and seeing how many cars go through and then we just keep assessing everything?
Yeah, it really starts and ends with CDOT.
Okay.
And their plans for their roadways, their main mission is to move traffic as efficiently and fast as possible. And so when we require a traffic study, we do want to know how many vehicle trips are turning right or left and which peak hours and all that stuff. We want to know the total average volume of traffic that's going to be generated by a development. And then we review that, and that goes to CDOT, and they say, yep, okay, that matches up with our corridor plan for this section of Highway 6 or 24. this is what we've planned for in our planning horizon of 10 or 20 years. And within our plans, because your developer is going to generate 20% more traffic, then he or she is going to be subject to turn lane improvements or whatever they have within their scope, right? That's their idea of mitigating traffic, and they're just expanding and trying to accommodate more.
I just feel like we can't expand this in town. Is there a max that actually?
Condemn. It's a
No, I don't think
Let's
there
take it.
is.
Okay.
I mean, that's a great question, but I just don't know where that question goes into the ether of CDOT and the state and
I guess maybe CDOT could say you don't get a new access permit because our streets can't handle it, but I don't see CDOT ever saying that.
I've never, ever heard of, right? They just say, you're gonna pay for a roundabout, or you're gonna pay for a turn lane, or you're gonna whatever.
And by the way, we're gonna raise your speed limit.
That too.
There's just nowhere we can't get larger. We can't, that's the one road.
Doesn't mean you can't try.
Yeah.
No.
I think that's all I had.
Sign program, sign permit,
Yeah,
sign variance.
I didn't have anything on there.
Okay,
I'm going back to page 142. Public hearing and zoning board of appeals.
142 of the packet or 142 of the document?
The document.
Document. We have 142.
last page.
Public hearing and zoning board of appeals.
Oh, hold on.
This is one of the few times I've ever heard the word board of appeals. I assume that's council?
Yep.
Should we not just say council?
no, it's a different hat they wear. It's an official title.
Oh,
Legal term. Comes from state statute.
Is it in the definition?
yeah, that's where I was going next. Thank you, Amanda.
I don't know if it is, but we certainly could.
That's,
It's probably smart to just say right off the bat, somewhere in here, that the town council is also the zoning board of appeals.
yes.
Yeah, like the zoning board of appeals, comma,
AKA.
yeah. Alias.
We will, I guess we could do that here, but we'll have another section of the code that talks about the powers and duties of the council and the powers and duties of the planning commission, and that's where it'll say the council can act as the ZBA.
Sort of like we're a planning commission, but we're all also DRB. Yes.
Yep.
I just,
Important acronyms.
anybody else?
Covering PUDs, major PUD amendments, sign permit, master sign program, sign variance. Comments? No?
You got it.
Okay?
You got it.
Let's go through a whole article. Nice.
Sorry.
Matt's
took
gonna be
the
so proud of
opportunity.
us.
Now, we're gonna continue to work on this.
That's great.
We will continue to work on this. We will take your comments and start making some changes and revisions. As I mentioned, there still are some sections that I'm not entirely happy with that we need to keep working on. So I think we'll probably end up bringing this back to you for another interim step just to report back.
And you'll be double lining things so that we know
However,
changes have been made,
however it makes most sense to, call it out.
red
Yeah.
or whatever, just to call it up so we know what is changed.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think we'll do that before I'm still not sure how we're gonna present this to council. If it's gonna be a joint work session and we're gonna bite off 3 or 4 of these articles and say, look at all the work we've done, or how we're gonna do that, but.
Can you just say,
I mean, can't you
It's
just
done.
give them a
Just
printout
go
like
to
you
them,
did
say-
us and say,
we got, yeah, this is, we're ready to file this. See if you like it.
Well, we do have,
We're the ones who deal with it the most, so that makes sense.
we're gonna keep working on Article 5. We need to present Article 8 to you, which is the same kind of thing, but for all the subdivision types. Minor subdivisions, exemption plats, major subdivisions. So we'll try to tee that up in September. We also need to get started on kind of the zone district piece and starting to develop some potential language for new zone districts and a new zone district map, and starting to talk to the community about that.
That's one of the biggest.
That's gonna be,
That's gonna make this look like child's play.
Michelle wants this done by the end of the year, and I think we'll get some stuff done, but I don't know.
It'd be nice to just like get this out of the way and adopt it.
We can't really do that.
Yeah, adopt it.
You gotta
Because
do
this
the
is-
whole thing.
You gotta
This
do
is
the
gonna
motion.
be a repeal and replace of the entire chapter 16.
I see,
And
okay.
chapter 17, which is the subdivision chapter. So we kind of have to do it all at once. But so if we can get through this stuff, review it, make final revisions, and have it sitting ready to be adopted, and keep doing that with parts and pieces, I think that's the idea.
I mean, are you gonna ask them if they wanna review X number of pages like this of a whole section comment, or are they expecting that we do our work?
I think they're expecting the planning commission to do the heavy lifting, and we're gonna
That's
bring
what I
them
think
more or
too.
less clean, well thought out new code.
Yeah, like,
But I do, I need to, I owe them an update on where we are. I've talked to the
Yeah.
mayor and said, hey, we're actually making progress. I'm sorry, we haven't been in front of you in a while. But they're due for an update of what we're doing. So I can do that, and I can talk to Michelle about when in this process would be a good time to do like a joint work session where we can start reporting back on some decisions that you've made, some recommendations that you've made, probably after we get through the zoning piece.
So we're starting the zoning piece next. I'm sorry, I kind of was,
On the heels of this will be the subdivision application types. So a very similar looking document that has what's the purpose of a minor subdivision? What are your submittal requirements? What is your process? What can the planning director waive, or what can the town engineer waive for subdivision plat details, things like that. So we'll do that next. But I also have to start working on the zoning piece, so we can get in front of the public and you in October at this point, or maybe November. Once we get to November, December, no one's having meetings, everyone's in holiday mode, and so feel like I'm racing against the clock to kind of get that out in the public.
when will we see the next version of this to make sure that all of our comments got included? Cause we're
Matt?
gonna have to read it again.
Yeah, I'd like to try to bring that back to you mid to late September.
Right.
Matt's gone until the 12th, and there's some things I want to talk to him about. I can certainly keep working on things, but
It's really in his court.
he just needs to be part of the discussion, I think, and maybe Mike Sawyer as well on some of these issues that we flagged.
Well, and there's all like the blue highlighted stuff that has to get, that's a lot of work too.
Those will be populated once we have those other sections of the code built out, right? So they'll all kind of cross-link, and those would probably come at the end, actually.
That's
But
challenging.
yeah, this is not a light undertaking, so I get that the council is, their patience is wearing thin. We've been talking about this for so long. I'm just happy that we're actually making progress
Yeah,
with actual code,
You
so.
don't wanna speed it up and make a mistake at this point.
Right.
Celebrate this small win.
Yeah.
Today.
So in your conversations with council members, be sure to pass that
Yeah,
along.
let's just go home and have one quick list.
Thank you, I guess on that note, thanks for your diligence in, reading this stuff, generating good comments and questions and plowing through it, so.
Well, he did a lot of work and it's 100% better than what we have.
Yep.
Opinion.
All right. What's
Hey, Miles.
Staff reports, managers report.
I know nothing about the manager's report, so please don't ask me any questions about it. When we get to planning department update, 541 Main Street, I included that application in the packet along with the pictures provided for the new windows and door. So that was approved actually the day the last packet went out, but it was just approved after the packet went out. So that's why it's now in this packet. even though it was approved a month ago. So, yes, if you have any questions, I can certainly answer
Does
those.
anybody have any questions on Eric's windows?
Nope.
Amanda?
No.
No. Future meeting, September 11th. Daryl, you
Planning
had
Commission
said you
comments?
would be
I'm not gonna be here.
on the September 11th.
Right.
Oh, planning commission comments. Anybody have? I'm trying to get us out.
I appreciate that we just
I'm
can't
here on
skip
September
over.
11th and September 25th. Thank you.
Jeff?
I think I'm here. Let me make sure. Sorry. I'm here. Yep, and, yep.
I'm not sure I'll be here September 11th because I have a dentist appointment at 4, and I don't know how long it's gonna last.
Well, you can always join us when you get done, if you want to talk.
Zoom in,
I can zoom in, okay. Yeah,
Yeah, you can zoom in.
I would suggest.
yeah.
And at this point, as far as
Which is
I'm
more
aware-
painful, the dentist or planning commission? I don't know, I'm just kidding.
If you get the camera in, right, no one can tell that you're close out.
It's not as
Is the other one?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay, 25th.
More
I'm fine.
horizontal than this.
And as far as I know of, I will be here.
God willing.
I have to have a cataract replacement.
Oh,
But
that
I'm
sucks.
far enough along to know how that all will pan out. And even then, he told me I could drive a car the next day, so I guess it's not that important.
It's amazing.
I know.
Okay.
Well, I've had eye surgery. It's amazing.
Have you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, I'm glad. You can tell me that.
It's amazing.
I just found that out, so.
With that,
With that,
Good night.
make a motion to
Yes.
adjourn tonight's meeting.
You may.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Where did you go to have it done?
I went down to the
everybody.
Dishler Institute. I really